From European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device. It is great to have your company, and feel free to send, pictures of snow at Cheltenham to us as well. We're just as happy to see those as well. I don't know what's going on outside the window here today. It's either going to be a beautiful spring day or the middle of winter. There's no way of knowing or predicting anymore, but climate change, lol. Anyway, coming up in this hour, lots and lots to talk about, and I want to hear from you on everything we are talking about. Look, we've got to lead on the possibility of a Ukraine ceasefire. Donald Trump has called on Putin to agree to a 30-day ceasefire, saying it takes two to tango. The ball is in Putin's court. This after securing Ukraine's approval for his plan to bring about an end to the war. Now, it's only 30 days. Whether or not Putin would agree to that, well, we're told by Donald Trump that he's the one who wants peace. Well, why wouldn't you agree to it if you want peace, A? Meanwhile, the US has agreed since those talks in Riyadh to restart intelligence sharing and weapons deliveries to Kyiv. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Are you hopeful that the war will end? Is it all down to Trump's brilliant diplomacy, his sort of, throwing everything up in the air? Is that what it's down to? Or has he basically bullied Zelensky into basically, God knows what, ceding half of his country to the Russian aggressor? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to call me a warmonger, feel free, but you've got to back it up with some facts, guys. Tell us what you think. Do you feel that we are going to be seeing an end to that war? Tell us why you think you're hopeful. Tell us why you're not hopeful. Whose side are you on? I think there's only one side to be on, but I'm old-fashioned like that. Do you think Trump is the mastermind of this? Love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Texts, of course, cost one standard network rate message. Free to message us on YouTube and on X as well, of course. Now, Donald Trump's trade war also continues. 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium, or sorry, as the Americans call it, aluminum. Why do they call it aluminum? It's like, literally, look at the letters in the word. Aluminium Aluminium is the word. Anyway, on all those imports to the US in effect from today, imposed, it's on everyone, not just Canada and Mexico and China, on the EU and on us as well. So I think about 5% of our steel exports go to America. It affects all UK products as well, first worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Now the EU has retaliated, but we have not. There's a little bit of a loving going on between Starmer and Trump. Will that pay off in the end? Plus, Keir Starmer has ordered the government to stop outsourcing decisions to regulators, despite the fact that he's created 27 new quangos since winning the election, because quangos is what government does now. This comes ahead of the PM's planned announcement, we understand, tomorrow about rewiring the British state. I mean, if he gets to do it and he does it, brilliant. Anyone got any hope that it's going to actually happen? I doubt it. Anyway, all that coming up, plus plenty more besides. Do stay tuned. Delighted to say joining me today is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative government advisor. Just on the rewiring of the state and the deregulation, all of that. I don't know how many times we heard that from your sodding lot. How many times we're going to hear that from this sodding lot and anyone else who ever gets elected. No one ever seems to do it. And as much as I hate a lot of the things that Elon Musk has been saying about Ukraine and other topics, I think his knowledge of world affairs is really questionable. But in terms of like deregulation in America and cutting back on taxpayer spending in the public sector in America, fully on board. But at least he's actually trying to do it.
Well, we have good words for it, don't we? Rewiring the state. I mean, what does that actually mean? If you're going to cut the number of civil servants, which is a big if, that Labour are suggesting, then fair play. Yeah. If that happens, it will be a very, very good thing.
Well, they're cutting it by 2%. I mean, 2%.
Any cut would be good, wouldn't it? And it's surprising that a Labour government would do it.
2% is just people leaving to get another job.
Yeah,
or retiring.
You and I know that.
I bet 2% retire every year.
Oh, I bet they do, and they're nice gold-plated pensions. So if they can do anything with the state, that would be lovely. I don't suspect they will for a second. They like to speak a good game. They want to cut down on regulators, but then we'll undoubtedly create another for this.
Yes, exactly. There'll be a new body. Again, Sentence Council really not doing a good job. Ofgem, Ofwat, all these bodies. Really no evidence that these bodies do anything to act for the consumer. That's certainly for sure. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about Ukraine. Are you hopeful? The question we're putting to everyone on 0344 499 1000. Are you hopeful that the war will now end? What do you make of what appears to have come out of these talks in Riyadh?
I think you always have to be hopeful. Nobody wants a war to continue. However, you've still got to deal with Putin. So if Ukraine have accepted an idea of a 30-day ceasefire, there's no guarantee that Putin's going to do so without huge demands going alongside it. And do we actually trust him to stand by any ceasefire agreement in the first place?
Because he hasn't with any other deal. And that was the point that Zelensky made to Trump when he got all angry with him in the Oval Office. But the Russians, I mean, they've made it really clear, stuff that Lavrov has said and other spokespeople for the Kremlin have said very clearly, that they won't accept any NATO troops in the country even after a ceasefire. Well, that's French and British. Well, that's pretty much only people offering to do it. They don't no NATO membership for Ukraine, end of, so that sort of guarantee, and US won't offer a guarantee, we understand, but also we understand they want formal recognition of the land that they have basically seized, Crimea, the Donbass region. That's not going to be something that Ukraine is going to want, or indeed that any NATO country other than Trump's United States would actually want, because you're basically rewarding that aggression, saying, yeah, absolutely fine, you own that territory now. That's very different from just putting down the weapons. This ceasefire deal, that it was supposed to be about, sea and air, it actually involves all frontline.
Yeah. It does.
I mean, let's face it, I don't think Zelensky had any choice. If he doesn't agree to it, well, he's the warmonger. OK, so Putin says it's Putin that wants peace. Quite clever. Well, put it back in Putin's court. Does Putin want to have a ceasefire, though? I mean, that will probably help Ukraine more. I mean, they're the ones who are, by the way, under attack at the current time. But why would Russia agree to a ceasefire?
You see, I don't think it's particularly in his interest to do so. The only reason I think that it will happen is that the sanctions are now starting to really bite in Russia. So all of the oligarchs that have millions of pounds, millions of dollars worth of investments are starting to look at the situation and go, this can't continue. Investments are going down and money is getting less. And when you have that much money and that much power, I think that will shift anything more.
But the entire Russian economy now is geared around the war effort. Once you stop that war effort, what happens to it? It's the only thing driving the economy. It's 40% of government spending right now. And also, let's face it, we've got a man who really doesn't care about putting yet another young man into the meat grinder.
but he's also running out of those young men to put in the meat
Not as quickly as the
grinder.
Ukrainians are.
No, not as quickly as the Ukrainians, but I think that is going to be a real issue, is that he's losing the ability to call up people to fight on his behalf. So I think you've got oligarchs getting pressure, the population dwindling, they're the ones that can go out and fight.
Yeah.
So is it going to be in his interest to carry on? I'm not sure it is.
I'm just of the view that Putin's like there's no reason to give up other than the fact he's playing Donald Trump like a little piccolo. Interesting development this morning in the last half hour. Of course, we were talking a little bit this week about this container ship that obviously involved in a crash with an oil a fuel tanker in the North Sea. The captain of the So Long, this is the container ship, the one that basically just smashed into an anchored ship. It turns out, and this is a man who has been arrested, a man has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter in connection with Monday's collision, but it turns out the captain of the So Long is a Russian national. Not just he happens to be Russian, he trained at the elite Russian naval school for senior naval officers. I mean, this is now turning into a Netflix box set, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think even James Bond wouldn't have had this storyline, would they? I mean, this is quite something. When you look at the crash that happens, you can't miss
isn't it?
that enormous ship that was parked up. It's probably not a technical term. So to drive straight into it...
The ship's parked up.
To drive straight into it took some brass neck, really. And it doesn't surprise me that there could well be Russian involvement.
Although the expert we spoke to yesterday is making the point, never ever discount utter incompetence. And I'm a very much an incompetence cock-up theory person rather than this theory. But it's an interesting fact worth taking into account, I think we can safely say. Let's also talk Trump trade wars, the tariff wars. Some amazing, wars of words between Canada and America that we've seen, with this 25% tariffs, and if there's on steel and aluminium and other goods coming in from Canada and also from Mexico. They did a deal with Mexico, and then these 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium across the world. It'll impact us. There's apparently some shipments which are going from Britain to America already sort of bought and paid for, but they won't because of bad weather in the Atlantic. They've been delayed, which means they're going to be hit with this tariff, so they become a quarter more expensive. That becomes an issue. It's going to affect everybody. Again, I don't understand. The problem is China subsidising their cheap steel and aluminium and then shipping over that. That's China's the main problem in terms of killing off Western steel production. Just do it to China. But we know that China is going to come back. Interesting with Canada, though. I thought it was very interesting. The Canadian regional leader, state leader, who's basically said, a lot of North America, millions of your people get their electricity from us. We're going to put a tariff equivalent on the electricity for American households. Trump thinks this is outrageous and says at that point he will put his tariffs up to 50%. On Canadian steel. I mean, completely off the scale stuff. At which point now there's a meeting. This guy's going to be travelling to America. There's going to be a meeting. So it's all explosive. It's all chatter and talk. Now, it may well be that this all works and Donald Trump manages to get more preferential treatment on tariffs when it comes to US goods. And the EU, I mean, they can talk a good game on this. The whole point of the EU is tariffs. It's a customs union. It's free trade within the EU, but outside it's tariffs. Yeah. So I don't know why the EU are getting all upset about, tariffs. That's literally what you do to every country you don't have a free trade deal with, which is most countries. One of the reasons why many countries in Africa are impoverished is because of the tariffs they face to sell any goods that are industrialised goods to the European Union, America, and otherwise. So I mean, shut your gob, frankly, Ursula von der Leyen. You're really not talking consistently, but. And there is a purpose to tariffs to protect homegrown industry and farming and to maintain your own national supply of goods. But this is clearly it's a power move, isn't it, by Donald Trump? Now, we're going to be talking to Justin Urquhart-Stewart a little bit later to explain how this all works. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to understand this is a tax, because he says this is going to be great for consumers. It could be good for American jobs. And it protects jobs. There's a reason why the EU, the EU has tariffs to protect, French farmers' jobs, Spanish fishermen's jobs, and German industrial jobs. That's what they're there for. It could be more onshoring of work, because basically the cheaper labour you're getting in Mexico or China is offset by the extra tariffs you're paying. So it's better to manufacture in America. and people having cheap goods is all very well, but if you haven't got a job, those cheap goods aren't affordable anyway. I do understand the argument there, but this sort of the bluster and the huge announcements, this is very difficult for business to deal with, isn't it?
It is. The uncertainty was showing yesterday in the US stock market. I watched it for about 20 minutes and just watching the red arrow sort of with all the stocks going down. I mean, that's going to have an enormous impact. But I think Trump needs to remember that these are ordinary Americans who will pay the price ultimately, especially when you look at things like aluminium, which make cans.
Yeah.
So if you like a can of soft drink or a can of beer, perhaps that's going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's what.
But he says he's going to. Yeah, the cost of living. Again, we talk about immigration an awful lot and wokedom and things that he get really happy about what he's doing about. Again, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I just take him policy by policy. There is no politician that I admire 100% for every single thing. But he's good on a number of things. On this, I think he's wrong. Yeah. And there will be many Republicans who are more into free trade, who will be appalled by this. But this, at the end of the day, tariff is a tax. It's just another word for a tax.
Yes.
And it's a tax that ultimately gets fed to consumers. Now, the tax is officially paid by the company that exports to your country. They face that tariff. But they don't just... No company is absorbing a 25% extra cost. They're going to pass it on to the consumer. Now, that makes those goods more expensive, so people then go, well, I'll buy something made in America instead of something made... in Europe or in China or Canada. However, that also means, realistically, they've got a choice between a higher good and American. The American goods may well go up in price as well.
Well, of course they will, because they want to be able to increase the profit, to provide the jobs and all of that. So whilst I agree that you need to look after homegrown talent and you need to look at how you use what you've got in your own country, things like car production in America is going to be incredibly difficult because the parts are often in one state.
They seem to move
things down into Mexico,
Canada, America,
up to Canada, and you think there's some of them that's 6 levels of tariff going to be on one part for a car, which makes cars.
I think he's now excluded the car industry because of that. But again, you should know this before you bring the tariff in. These sort of sweeping announcements don't do anyone any good. But we shall see. What do you think of Britain's reaction? Because the EU has hit back with the equivalent, I think it's 26 billion pounds worth of tariffs on different goods, not on steel and other goods that the US exports to the EU. We have not retaliated. We are sort of in talks about a possible free trade deal. Do you think that is weakness on Keir Starmer's part, or do you think it's actually rather wise?
No, I think it's rather wise to not have a knee-jerk reaction like the EU has done by ramping it up and getting very angry. I think that we need to sit and settle and see how this is going to impact us as a country, but also that trading agreement is going to be much better if you're not going to anger the other side by pushing them into a corner.
Although there does seem to be a situation where Trump responds very well to someone, when the Canadians go, right, well, we're going to put the same tax on electricity for American households who get our electricity. He seems to back down.
But does he? I mean, there are still tariffs going for Canadian goods, so he hasn't backed down all of the way. And that's their nearest neighbour. They share a border. We're a little country that's very far away. We're not quite got the same pull as that.
Well, I mean, Canada's got a bigger impact. I mean, something like 60% of their trade is with America. I mean, it's a huge amount, isn't it? Love to hear your thoughts on that, about how we should respond to that, actually, if at all. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Also, just want to talk about, I mean, so much more to talk about reform, ongoing battles, but also the extraordinary words of John Hunt, who... I can't believe he lost 2 of his 3 daughters and his wife to the Crossbow killer, Kyle Clifford. He was found guilty, pleaded guilty to the murder of his ex-girlfriend, her sister and her mother in a Crossbow knife attack. He then pleaded not guilty, but was found guilty of raping his ex-girlfriend, a misogynist, just an all-round nasty piece of work. That's why she dumped him after 18 months, because she realised that he wasn't a good guy. Came back to basically a revenge killing. He also shot himself with a crossbow and is now in a wheelchair. Good. Behind bars for the rest of his life. He got a whole life tariff. But I think the most 2 significant things in the court case yesterday, one, we were talking about on air, he refused to come up for the sentencing, and the judge decided not to force him to come, or indeed to even watch the sentencing and the victim statements on a video feed. I mean, I'd have personally dragged him out of his wheelchair, got out myself and dragged him into the courtroom, gagged him if necessary, end of. I just find it extraordinary that a convicted killer isn't required to do that, and I'm sure somebody who worked in the Home Office, you'd agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why was that ever allowed?
I don't know. It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't. You need to.
I thought the Tories were going to deal with that when it came up last year.
Well, I think they were. I think the election then kind of got in the way of
Yeah,
it all.
there's an awful lot of things that got in the way of Rishi Sunak doing stuff, wasn't there? It's almost like he chose when the election would be.
Really? A shocker. But I think, no, people who commit these crimes need to understand, need to listen.
I mean, my thing is, if he refused to go in his jail cell, you'd force him into the jail cell.
Precisely.
If he refused to come out for food or something, you'd force him. You'd be able to force him into the sodding court.
You need to sit there and face what you've done.
If he wants to have a full-on tantrum and scream and shout, fine, we'll just sit and watch you make an idiot of yourself.
But can't you put them in one of those sort of perspex boxes, which you can have piped-in sound, but we don't hear the scream?
I just think it's untenable. You're a guilty man. Yeah, I mean, if you're in it until the point when you're found guilty, you're technically an innocent man, and therefore, we shouldn't be forced to attend court if you don't want to. I get that, but once you're guilty, sorry, mate, end off. But also the most extraordinary statement from John Hunt, who lost, as I say, two of his. He said he lost 3/4 of his family. I can't imagine what his other daughter, Amy Hunt, is going through as well. And she said, she wished it was her and their place, which is just an awful thing for her to think. But his words, I really admire him for this. A, saying what he said, but B, the fact that he. So many people in this scenario say, I think, the right thing, they feel, where they sort of talk about, forgiveness and moving on and things. That's not how I feel if someone had killed 3 members of my family. I've got to be honest with you. And his words, I thought they were just so powerful. He said, Kyle, just remember one thing. Whatever sentence you're about to receive, whatever misery lies ahead for you, remember on your dying day, there will be no release for you, Kyle. The screams of hell, Kyle, I can hear them now. They're going to roll the red carpet out for you. He described the killer as callous, cowardly and vindictive. He said Louise, his daughter, who died, enjoyed more success and fulfilment in one morning than you achieved in your entire miserable life. He says, I simply say that you are a psychopath who, for the duration of your time together with Louise, was able to disguise yourself as an ordinary human being. You managed to maintain that veneer of decency. He's talked about how proud he is of his daughter for having broken up with him. But he said, whatever sentence you're about to receive, whatever lies ahead of you for the next 6 years, your days on earth are done. There will be no release for you. The red carpet will come out for you. He said, at that point, when the person you could have been meets the person you are, you will realise your miserable fate will last for eternity. I've just got so much admiration for him for speaking on behalf of his wife and 2 daughters and the rest of the family who left bereaved, and saying what needs to be said to this awful man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same as you. I wouldn't be offering up any forgiveness. And this was such an incredibly moving and strong statement. Hands down, he is the bravest man I think I've seen in a long time.
But also, it's weird that people tend to applaud people for showing forgiveness.
No,
I mean, there are times for forgiveness. I mean, again, if this guy had shown any remorse or respect, or but he was a wrong, he was a nasty little misogynistic. It turns out also apparently racist. One of the reasons why Louise dumped him was because he was a nasty little piece of work, controlling and unpleasant. And basically he couldn't deal with the fact he'd been dumped apparently in a very nice and respectful way, and it was a power move. I mean, call him what he is, and he will, I don't believe in heaven and hell, but my God, if there is one, he will rot in it.
Yes.
But I think what John Hunt said was really, really powerful and needed to be said. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reaction to that, actually. Give us a call on that as well, 0344 499 1000. But in particular, I do want to hear from you about Ukraine, because Zelensky has backed a US peace plan for Ukraine. It was this meeting in Saudi Arabia. Trump has now called on Putin to agree to the 30-day ceasefire, saying it takes 2 to tango. Are you now hopeful that the war will end? How important this is? Tell us whether you're hopeful, tell us whether you're not, and tell us why you think that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:27 is the time. Let's get some of your messages coming in about the Ukraine peace plan, whether or not you're hopeful or not. Dave says no, not when Trump's in Putin's pocket. Bob says nonsense, a 30-day ceasefire during which the US has promised to resupply Ukraine with weapons and intel. Why would that be palatable to Russia as they plough ahead? Well, exactly. I mean, I don't think Russia will, but again, be nice to see the US understanding on whose side they should be. Joey says Putin doesn't tango; he marches. In 2 years' time, he'll be back to take the rest of Ukraine. Exactly. Ray says that's a joke, right? You actually believe Russia is going to give Ukraine 30 days to build up their stuff again? Don't think so. Well, that's the thing. It would benefit Ukraine more than Russia because of the relative size of the countries. But again, I thought Russia wanted peace. I think we've been told, don't we? It's Putin that wants peace, isn't it?
Yeah.
Curtis says, hopefully Putin has said he wants peace, so now it's on the table. Let's hope he agrees. Dee says, I'm not holding my breath, hoping for peace for sure, though. Let's also talk about reform. I do feel free to call in. You're not very keen on Ukraine. I mean, again, taking on all comers. If you disagree with me on Ukraine and you think that Putin is Mr. lover man who desperately wants peace and is just trying to help those poor Russian-speaking nationals in Ukraine, I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. You're very very lively on social media. Not so lively when it comes to the phones, interestingly. I wonder how representative those people are. But let's talk about reform, because every day we wake up to another development. Now, Nigel Farage has said basically there is no way back for Rupert Lowe. He's not coming back to reform. I don't think Rupert Lowe now would want to come back to reform. We've got an appeal from Ben Habib, who also left reform, was ousted as deputy leader when Zia Yusuf was brought in as chairman and has to go over that role. Basically saying, look, we should set up a splinter group. Rupert Lowe, I mean, I have to say, a masterful campaign against showing, have clearly not got signs of dementia. All of his staff, not some of them, all of his parliamentary staff and constituent staff writing a letter, which he put out yesterday saying, this guy is a lovely guy to work for. We've not had any issue with his behaviour. When we've had briefings, public statements and off-the-record briefings from senior figures in reform that there have been problems with his behaviour. We're told, there's now a police investigation into a claim that he's threatened to kill, get confusion. He made threats of violence towards Zia Yusuf. Again, he says why are the police making a statement? They've not interviewed me, they've not asked me, I've said I'll cooperate. But one of the lines we told from Nigel Farage today, that he had said he would slit the throat of reform. But again, that's not a threat. That's language. That's a form of words. I find it really difficult because I completely understand that people do struggle to work with Nigel Farage in terms of his ego. However, Nigel Farage is reform, and when he's telling, we understand, reform MPs like Rupert Lowe, you need to tone down the language on deportations and things like that. I think he's right to do that, because it is about now broadening the appeal of reform. Yeah. You've got those people, those voters are in the bag. You need to reform, you need to expand, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be a protest party anymore. You want to be a party that is actually able to govern, and you need to broaden your support then. So whose side are you on, if anyone's?
Well, I'm not on anybody's side. I mean, I'm just watching the fallout, because the Conservative Party have been through this on many occasions where they've all fallen out with each other. And I think it's very upsetting for an awful lot of people that have put a lot of stock into voting for reform and wanting them to succeed, to see them rip themselves to pieces. So it's not being fair on those people that have been out there supporting them.
Yeah.
And I think
a lot of people are really tearing their hair out.
They are. They wanted this to work. It looked like the main characters in reform wanted it to work. And I can understand that as the de facto leader, Nigel Farage has a vision that...
Well, de facto, he is the leader. At the end of the day, and again, Rupert Lowe was criticising him publicly in interviews. You can't do that.
No, you can't. There has to be
consistent... You can't do that. That's just not what you... In no job are you allowed to do that, though that is acceptable. I really admire Rupert Lowe. I've got so much time for him. I think he's been a fantastic campaigner, and he speaks a lot of sense. I just want to get all these men in the room and just bang their heads together. I really, really do. Come on, chaps. Come on. We don't have to even do it on air. Let's just get you in a room.
Oh, no,
couple of drinks. I mean, I'd love to do it on air, but, a couple of drinks and just literally bang your heads together, because we just can't have a situation where people who are basically offering British voters an alternative that an awful lot of British voters want, and falling out. We don't have time for this. We don't have time for this. This is, we're in an existential emergency, I really think, in our country, in terms of dealing with some of the issues over free speech, over immigration, over crime and things like that. And I just don't think, with all due respect to Kemi Badenoch and to the likes of Robert Jenrick, that the Tories are a viable offer at the current time in terms of dealing with that, because no one trusts anything they say, because they've talked the talk for too long and they've not walked the walk, and people want to give another party an opportunity.
They do, and they don't want that party to then splinter into another group. I mean,
the People's Front of Judea and the Judea People's Front.
Exactly, and people are going to look at it and it's just going to split that vote, and people are going to walk away and not vote at all, which is the worst of all worlds. Exactly.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Ukraine, anything we're talking about, do get in touch. The time now is 10:33. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. I promise we will get your calls in a few minutes' time, particularly on Ukraine. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. First up, though, let's talk to Freddie Gray. He's the US editor of The Spectator and joins us now to talk about where we are with Ukraine. Very, very good morning to you, Freddie.
Good morning, Julia. Lovely to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, look, the ball is in Russia's court now. It takes two to tango, says Donald Trump, after Ukraine has apparently agreed to a 30-day ceasefire deal. We don't know all the details, what the terms are, but it's only 30 days. Russia's, certainly the words we've heard since that deal was done in Saudi Arabia, fairly non-committal, I think is the best way of putting it. What do you think the chances are the Russians will agree to any sort of deal?
I think they are perhaps more significant than a lot of British commentators I've heard this morning are making out. It's clear that Trump and Putin had a phone call, perhaps several phone calls in the last few weeks. And clearly they have agreed something in before all these make-up and break-ups with Zelensky in Ukraine, what exactly they can offer back is very much up for debate. Last week, Putin made clear there wouldn't be any territorial concessions. They wouldn't accept anything other than Ukraine neutrality. It's going to be very difficult to find the middle ground for peace. However, as Marco Rubio says, the ball is now in their court, and I think it'll be very interesting to watch. If, let's say, Putin doesn't budge, and Trump then responds, as he is probably bound to respond, with fire and fury rhetoric, it'll be very interesting to watch British politicians go from saying Trump is, no longer our friend, he's our enemy, and all this sort of stuff, to suddenly declaring him a hero of the West and the new Churchill.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, this is the thing. He's basically, said, he appeared to side with Putin when that argument with Zelensky in the Oval Office at the end of February. It was very much, Putin wants peace. You're the, all the words afterwards as well. Zelensky's the warmonger. So Zelensky, to a certain extent, is calling the bluff, not just of Donald Trump, but of Vladimir Putin as well. But as you say, if Putin is basically saying, look, no ceding any territory. Indeed, they want international recognition of the territory they have seized, Crimea and the Donbass. No NATO membership, no even NATO troops on the ground at all as a peacekeeping force. I'm not quite sure where there is room for manoeuvre. If Donald Trump basically says, oh well, never mind, nothing we can do, and then puts more pressure on Ukraine, there are going to be some big questions to ask about what on earth his relationship with Vladimir Putin is. If, however, he responds by saying, well, there's going to be more economic sanctions, we're going to give more aid to Ukraine, then to a certain extent, Putin's bluff will have been called, and indeed Donald Trump's trust in Putin.
I think that's a good point, but I also think that Donald Trump recognises that at the moment Putin has far more leverage than Ukraine does. Yeah. This is a stalemate in many ways, but it's also a stalemate where Russia has the upper hand. And for the people that want this war to continue until Russia backs off, they need to have a more realistic idea of how this war will end. Yeah. Because at the moment, as the Russians have said along, the West seems to be willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, but we don't actually have serious proposals for ending the war. So Trump recognizes that, and that's why he's been pretty hard on Ukraine, pretty hard on Zelensky, in order to bring Ukraine to this point where they are at a point where peace is possible.
I mean, the other option, of course, which would be the preferable option, and the option which I've been supporting for the last 3 years, is that the West gives enough aid and help to Ukraine soon enough that they can defeat the Russians and push the Russians, maybe not from Crimea, but maybe from Donbass, but certainly secure their own territory. That option, again, the sort of pussyfooting around that the West has done has shown the weakness, which is what Putin has been able to basically capitalise on. Here's the thing, though. What is the American view on this, the American public? Because we know, the MAGA crowd, for some reason decided Zelensky is the baddie and Putin is the goodie. I just don't know where they've got this from. Some mad conspiracy theorists on the web. And Elon Musk is fully signed up to this madness. But largely, Democrats would largely, be very much pro-Zelensky. What the average Republican voter, the average voter in America, though, how do they feel about this? Whose side are they on?
I think the average Republican voter and many independents and even quite a few Democrats are very wary of foreign entanglements. It's a long-standing sort of spirit that guides America. Yeah. Is that foreign entanglements are dangerous and we don't want them. And they also have had very bad experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they are rightly, I think, concerned that America will find itself in a confrontation with Vladimir Putin's Russia, which is a far more dangerous power than the Taliban or Saddam Hussein. And that has always been their guiding spirit. And of course, yes, it's not as relevant to them as it is to Europe, because there is, as Donald Trump says, that big, beautiful ocean in between them.
Well, yeah, rather more relevant to us, indeed.
But I don't think we should be too, cynical about Americans. They, when Trump says he wants people to stop dying, that was a popular line on the campaign trail because Americans actually do want peace, and they're not. Well,
best way of people not dying is if Putin doesn't invade another country. I mean,
Well, yes, but that's happened. It has to be dealt with.
Yeah, again, rather than saying, well, OK, carry on, keep the land you've taken, and then gear up for taking the next section of Ukraine and then the next country on your western flank. I mean,
well, that's true, but then where's the deterrence if Putin actually ends up winning this war?
Well, exactly. But that's my whole point. That Putin should not be allowed to win this war, and America needs to wake up to that, because at some point they're going to have to, as indeed Europe is now waking up. Let me talk about tariffs, because we've got a tariff war going on as well. And at the same time, when Donald Trump is talking about easing economic sanctions on Putin and the Russian economy, massive tariffs on the Canadians, the Mexicans, Chinese. Again, you can understand about this massive tariffs on China, which is just dumping incredibly cheap steel and other goods on Western markets, but also on the EU and on the UK. We've had some pushback, certainly from the Canadians, threat of a 50% tariff at one point, and then the threat back on putting 20% tariff on electricity coming from Canada. And it's the ramping up of the war of words has been extraordinary. Where does this end?
Very, very good question. It could end in global recession. I try to always see method in the Trump madness. I think that's quite a good approach to analysing.
I mean, it's hard to do often.
But it was very hard yesterday, because you suddenly had Trump saying, actually, we're going to put a 50% tariff on Canada in a very tantrumy, what I heard called a tantrum tariff on Canada in response to their retaliatory tariffs. And then overnight, that was sort of gently walked back, and we're back to 25% tariffs. So that all feels like crazy bluster and very dangerous economically, that sort of bluster. However, I think America, at the more sort of serious level, is committed to tariffs, not just as negotiating tariffs to make other nations behave more fairly in their eyes towards them, but also to try and build up the American working class. That part of it is that a lot of economists will tell you that won't work. But there are some economists who think that there may be some sense in it. Yeah. That maybe the stock market will have to take a big hit, but Main Street, meaning real America, as opposed to Wall Street, will prosper as a result.
Yeah, in terms of basically onshoring jobs, it's all very well having cheap goods produced internationally, but if you haven't got a job to pay for those cheap goods, doesn't matter what prices. Freddie Gray, lovely to talk to you. I hope you'll come on again soon. Freddie Gray's US editor of The Spectator. Thank you for that. Claire Pearson, your thoughts?
That was a really good roundup, wasn't it? And I do love the line of was it a tantrum tariff? I think that just sums it up nicely. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Freddie always puts it into perspective and is very calm. It's a lot more calm than I think that I am. Yeah. He can see the positives, which is what I always find very difficult when we're talking about President Trump and his outbursts.
Yeah, but again, I don't mind if there is a method in these things. I just sometimes wonder if there is a method. That's the thing. Let's go back to Ukraine, though. Let's go to your calls quickly. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. And Kevin is on the line, and he's in Durham. Hello, Kevin.
Hello there. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning to you. What do you want to say, Kevin?
Well, I've always had an issue with Ukraine, because go right back to the beginning, before this war started, there was a lot of talk about NATO going into Ukraine. And Putin, we all know Putin is evil and he's a thug. And most of us out here in the wilderness think that. But on the other hand, if Biden had said to Putin, that NATO was not going to go into Ukraine, and then Putin still invaded Ukraine, then he needed everything thrown at him. But him not giving that reassurance was justification. Can I clarify? When you say NATO going into Ukraine, it was never about NATO going into Ukraine. It was about Ukraine being threatened by Russia and by Putin repeatedly, and seeking NATO defence. NATO is a defence arrangement against invasion by Russia, which is why Ukraine wanted to come under that umbrella. By the way, Vladimir Putin also thought that Ukraine joined the EU. Which is supposedly just an economic body. That's what we were told anyway. We went in, and not hasn't got its own army or anything yet. And he saw that as a threat. Vladimir Putin would have used whatever he chose that week as his excuse for going in. It's absolute nonsense. Well, this is where my issue is with you, because I think because Boris Johnson actually arrived in Kiev on the eve before they were going to have peace talks on the eve, and told Lizinski, sorry my pronunciation, but told Kiev and Ukraine to join NATO. And, us out here, when we receive the news, like we get the news, we understood that NATO is a force, and if it's allowed to go into Ukraine, then they can set up any base they like there.
It's not a force, it's a defence treaty. It's a defence treaty against the threat of invasions by Russia. Why on earth would all these countries want to be part of NATO, other than the fact that Russia is a threat? Oh look, it's just proven that it is a threat if you're not a member of NATO. By the way, again, this case, Boris Johnson did go to Kyiv. We know there was a meeting. We know it's the whole talk about the war. There was a peace. Well, again, talk about in 22, a few months after the war, that there was going to be a peace deal, but Boris Johnson and the West talked Zelensky out of it. They made it really clear that the realities of what was going to happen if they did actually sign a deal. They were going to lose all that territory. Kevin, again, it's this way that they're talking about NATO. These are Kremlin talking, but this is how the Kremlin talks about NATO. NATO has never invaded another country. NATO's treaty, Article 5, has only been invoked once, and that was to defend America after the Taliban harboured the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan to attack the Twin Towers and the defence building. Even the language in which it's couched in, this is stuff from the internet, which is all put on there by Russian troll farms. I really am worried about how much people are believing this abject nonsense. I mean, this is not me talking MSM talk. This is just facts. It's just facts. 10:48 is the time. Do keep your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. Up next, we are going to be talking about what is going on in Parliament with Kate Hoey, Baroness Kate Hoey. This is Talk.
Say woman whilst you're having your life saved. Right. It has to be a person with breasts. Can you imagine about to take your last gasp and say, don't call me a woman? Right.
I know.
I mean, what is it, man?
It's ridiculous because, again, they're using words which don't make any sense. You know, call somebody a woman, you know what you're talking about, right? Yeah. But if you call somebody a person with breasts, it's already longer. It's already not accurate because a woman might not necessarily have breasts. What about a woman who's had a mastectomy? What about a woman who perhaps is less well endowed than another woman? You know, it's not accurate.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Still with me is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor. I'm going to get your thoughts on what my next guest has to say, because having someone who worked in government, we've got Keir Starmer is ordering his Labour ministers to stop outsourcing decisions to regulators. Basically, he said ministers that told they must take responsibility for decisions. He suggested some regulators see their power moved in-house. He's announced plans to abolish the payment systems regulator. However, he's also set up 27 other quangos during the time since he's been in office since July. Let's talk about this with Baroness Kate Hoey. She's a former Labour MP, now an independent peer. Hello to you, Kate.
Good morning, Julia.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? Every government comes in and says, oh, we're going to tackle waste, tackle the quangos, bring back accountability. None of them ever do it.
No, and they love quangos because quangos give them that way of not taking ultimate responsibility for something. You can always blame somebody else. And the idea that somehow, you know, by getting rid of one particular quango when he's created so many in the last 6 months, it means that he's serious. Pat McFadden in the Cabinet Office has been saying the same thing. But we'll, you know, the proof's in the pudding. And, you know, just last night in the Lords, we were discussing the Football Governance Bill, which is going to be a huge regulator, which is going to be hugely, you know, difficult for football and actually not help the fans at all. And in the end, you know, it's just another way of not taking responsibility. I don't really think.
But again, we've got all these regulators. We've got, you know, we've got the off-gem for energy bills and off-what for water bills, and we've got the sentencing council. That, you know, we've seen the problems with them, and none of these bodies seem to actually act for the consumers in any way. It's just, you know, quite highly paid people with a lot of staff pushing more paper around. And again, the key thing is they're unaccountable to you and me. They're unelected. They're appointed. They're sort of the usual great and the good who are appointed, and you just sort of wonder, like, well, they're not accountable to us.
No, that's the crucial issue. And there's an example at the moment, of course, of the Sentencing Council, which has made this ridiculous thing about, you know, taking all sorts of things into account if you're from an ethnic minority background or a particular issue.
Or a man who wears a dress.
Yeah, and you know, the government has actually said, the Justice Minister has said, this is wrong. We don't agree with this. But you know, unlike what they can do in America, simply say, well, stop it. It's not happening. We can't even regulate the regulators. So
but the extraordinary thing with Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, she said when she was put to her by Robert Jedrick last week, her shadow, you know, she appeared not to know much about it and said she wouldn't be allowed to happen. But the Sentencing Council has written back this week and said, we're independent, you can't interfere with us. But the whole point of judges and magistrates, you know, making independent decisions, that's for them with an individual case and deciding an individual case. The actual guidelines, like what sort of prison sentences and what sort of punishments there should be, that is absolutely the job of an elected government with the backing of a you know, democratically elected parliament. I mean, I don't know why anyone working on the Sentencing Council thinks that it isn't the job of elected accountable representatives to decide what prison sentence someone should get and what should be considered an aggravating or not aggravating factor.
No, we should. I mean, the law should be there to be implemented, and we're getting it now more and more with the courts, where you're getting people saying, actually, what's the point almost of electing an MP and electing government? Because in the end, things they do, having said they would do it even in their manifesto, whichever government it is, then the courts turn around and say this is against human rights, this is which is why the argument to look at how our whole human rights lawfare sort of industry has grown up has got to be some way tempered, and whether Keir Starmer, as a former barrister lawyer himself, has the you know, the determination to take that on.
Taking on all his mates. But the key thing is, I mean, most of these quangos, most of these bodies were set up under Tony Blair or Gordon Brown. You know, you were an MP, you were involved.
Labour loved quangos.
But again, what's interesting is, you know, when Labour got out of office for 14 years, but effectively was still running everything, because all of their values, all of their people, anyone who was great and good at any point during Labour, they've still got a job. They're still on the public payroll. And look, this is one of the reasons why, one of the key reasons I voted voted for Brexit, was I wanted anyone who makes a decision that can affect my life or my country, I want to be elected and accountable. I don't have to agree with them. I don't agree with an awful lot that the Labour Party are saying and doing. But I mean, some of it I think is pretty sensible, cheering them on that. But the point is, they were democratically elected under our democratic system. Anyone who's just appointed and just on the public payroll, making decisions that affect my life. Like, who are you and why do you have a say over my life if I don't get a say in getting rid of you if I don't like it? I mean, it's the same thing. Why do any of these bodies exist?
Well, sometimes something could be useful in terms of checks and, checking that things are actually happening properly and that the prices, for example, are not being put up too much.
But they should be always accountable to a government minister who's accountable to Parliament and accountable to us.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. They should be there to help government carry out its policies that they've been elected on. What now they seem to be doing more and more is preventing things or changing things. And then when the government wants to do something to stop that, they can't do it without going into some kind of extra, legal, having some more bills go through Parliament. No, it's a nonsense. But I think, the problem now at the moment for the Labour Party is that what Keir Starmer is, he's becoming this international figure now. And, so he presumably wants to do something every now and again that makes people think, look, he actually does still care about what's happening on the ground.
Our lives. Yeah, well, we'll see. And again, the proof is in the pudding. Baroness Kate Hoey, independent peer, former Labour MP. Thank you so much. Claire Pearson, you worked in government more recently than Kate Hoey did. But the thing is, as Labour alone to their costs as well when it comes to civil servants. Might actually quite like the idea of some of them turning up to work in the office and getting the job done. They're obstructive. But these quangos, they're totally out of control.
Well, they are. I mean, do we not remember back in 2010 we tried to have a bonfire of the quangos under the coalition governments?
But how'd that work for you?
We got rid of some.
And they're paid huge sums of money, a lot of these people.
Taxpayers' money.
I think a lot of money. Big swanky offices.
They do, and it's taxpayers' money. They're not accountable. We can't get rid of them, as you said, and they're doing the job that Whitehall should be doing.
Yeah, and again, I've never understood Whitehall in the civil service. They're supposed to be the first-class, service, the world-class service. Yeah. And they've all got their first from Oxford and Cambridge, and yet they have to bring in consultants to advise them what to do. Well, I mean, why don't you just employ the consultants and get rid of those civil servants? It's utterly bizarre. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that as well. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, particularly on Ukraine. Are you hopeful of peace? Going to talk more about reform and their ongoing feud. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
I can announce this government
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, lovely to have your company. Still wonderful to have the company of Claire Pearsall, former Conservative government advisor. We talk far too much sense for someone who used to be a former Conservative government advisor. You know what I mean. I mean that nicely.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Coming up in this hour, more on Ukraine. Donald Trump's called on Vladimir Putin to agree to a 30-day ceasefire, saying it takes two to tango. It's after he secured Ukraine's approval for his plan to bring about an end to the war. It's just 30 days. It's not a long-term peace. Meanwhile, the US has agreed to restart not just intelligence sharing, but also weapon deliveries to Kyiv. Zelensky has also been invited back to the White House weeks after their Oval Office bust up. Also, the Crossbow killer, Kyle Clifford, is going to die behind bars after he was handed a whole life order for murdering his ex-girlfriend, her sister and her mother. Extraordinary words from the father and husband involved there, John Hunt, in court yesterday. Also, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has warned that Labour's obsession with slashing the use of prison will lead to more persistent criminals getting away with soft punishments. Some extraordinary crimes have been exposed where people have just got a string of offences to their name and are getting incredibly light sentences because, we've got no space in prison. Well, aren't those the people we should have space for? Plus, Donald Trump's trade war continues. 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports to the US in effect from today. It affects UK products worth hundreds of millions of pounds. We're going to talk to Justin Urquhart-Stewart to get to the bottom of where are we? What do tariffs do? How much impact will there be? And what is Donald Trump hoping to achieve with that? Because there is perhaps a method in his madness. I'd love to hear from you on all the topics we're talking about, but in particular whether or not you're hopeful that the Ukraine war will end. Now we know that Zelensky has backed a US peace plan for Ukraine. It's a 30-day ceasefire. Now Donald Trump is asking Vladimir Putin, we're going to have phone calls with him, possibly meetings about whether or not there is going to be a ceasefire, but he says it takes two to tango. Are you hopeful that the war will actually end? Tell us why you think it will. Tell us why you think it won't. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. Goodness me, that takes a long breath, that one. I'm getting through. I'm getting through that coughing today. I keep going to breaks early yesterday with coughing. I'm apologies for having to listen to the deeper and deeper voice every day. But whatever this lurgy is, it ain't going anywhere. As far as I can tell, everyone I know's got it. But there we are. I was patient zero. Apparently. Apologies for that. Anyway, Claire Pearsall, who survived 3 hours with me last week and didn't get it, so fingers crossed for today. I think it's because you hang around with horses a lot. Yeah. You hang around with a lot of dirt and muck, and I think that makes you healthy.
It does, yeah.
She's a good, solid,
good solid girl, thanks.
Good solid breeding stock. That's what Claire is. Good solid breeding stock.
There you go.
You know those sickly. I've become one of those sickly people, and I despise myself.
Come out into the countryside.
Got to go live in the countryside. Is that what it is? I live in too clean an environment in the city.
You do. Little bit of dirt.
This is the answer, folks. But there we are. Ukraine. Let's come back to Ukraine. Asking for calls on this. Obviously, calls are always welcome on anything we're talking about. Are you hopeful? Do you think we are going to see a ceasefire deal? The US definitely want one. Everyone, we want the war to stop in Ukraine. And people say, if you don't want the war to stop, you're a warmonger. Well, it depends on what terms it would stop. Because again, we could have not had a war with Hitler in 1939, but on what terms would we have had to agree to not go to war with Hitler? We just leave the whole of Europe under Nazi control and face a constant threat on our shores. Come on, guys. It's about the terms. Do you think there are any terms that are going to be involved in this that Russia will end up agreeing to?
It doesn't feel like it. It's not in Russia's interest to go agreeing to anything that anybody else
I think you'll find that Putin is the only one who wants peace if you check more closely with Donald Trump.
OK. Yeah, if we believe that, we'll believe anything. I don't suspect for a second that is actually what he feels. I think Putin will quite happily carry on fighting. He isn't going to kowtow to anybody. He never wants to be the loser in any situation.
Do you think he's been playing Trump like a fiddle?
I think so. I think it's, the pair of them have been using each other as dance partners in this and looking the strong man and looking to be the world leader. And it's only going to end in disaster.
I mean, one could hope that somehow through this madness we can get to something resembling peace. I mean, people, again, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of young men. I'm not just worried about the Ukrainian men, the Russian conscripts as well, who are being fed into the meat grinder, who are dying. But again, on what terms is that peace? Because I think let's be realistic. Ukraine ain't getting Crimea back anytime soon. No. Certainly while Putin is still in office. Looks like most of the Donbass will be gone as well. But at the very minimum, there has to be a guarantee of the territory that Ukraine still retains, which is 80% of their territory. Now, realistically, that can only be maintained and protected with NATO membership or a guarantee. I don't even think a guarantee from America is worth the paper it's printed on now under Donald Trump. He's so unpredictable. But certainly a guarantee with French, British and other coalition of the willing troops. There's more meetings happening today, tomorrow and Friday about that. But Vladimir Putin has made it clear he would not accept having any troops. He would consider that an act of provocation. I mean, everything's sneezing is an act of provocation to Vladimir Putin. If those troops were on Ukraine territory, at which point then, so how can Ukraine agree to anything if there's no guarantee? Because we know what Russia will do. It will do what it's always done and what it did after Crimea and what it does in all of those states it considers its own area of influence. It will just regroup, train up some more soldiers, get the economy on fire, after the sanctions are over, and then it will take more territory.
Well, of course it will, and I think history teaches us that he isn't going to leave it alone. Just because he says, this is the agreement now, doesn't mean it will be the same agreement in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or whenever he feels like it.
Murderous dictators sometimes lie. I know. We're all shocked.
We are very shocked at that. So I don't think that we can take that as a cast iron guarantee. Peacekeeping troops, I'm not in favour of boots on the ground, I have to admit. However, if it's going to secure that area for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, then I think we have to do it. So the devil's going to be in the details.
My thing is that people say, you send your own child off to war, would you go and fight? They're not asking us to fight. We're pointing out that this is about peacekeeping forces, and very, very simple message, which is that we can either contain Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, or we will end up containing him in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which we are honour bound by treaty to defend. The Poles won't give a single soldier, not because they don't want to defend Ukraine, because they are so scared that they are going to be, on the list after Belarus and after Moldova. Vladimir Putin's ambitions are laid out and very clear. He doesn't shy away from them. It's like the Chinese, Xi Jinping and Taiwan. It's not like they're pretending they're not going to take it.
They've already said, and if somebody says something you need to believe that they're telling the truth.
Exactly. It's like Maya Angelou line, when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. Exactly. The trade war, we've got the other trade war going on. It is fascinating, though, that, I do find it extraordinary, Donald Trump's treatment of Canada. The fact that this man is going to enable Mark Carney to bloody have a chance of winning that election later this year in Canada after the abject failures of the Liberal government. Mark Carney, again, I've met the guy. I say our kids were at the same school when he was in London. He was wrong about Brexit. He was a complete fear-mongerer on Brexit, totally outside his independent remit. He's a fear-mongerer on climate change. He's worked for all the big banks, the Goldmans and all of that. He's a very nice, charming man, highly, highly intelligent. But he's wrong about everything. Okay, he's wrong about everything, and this is not a man that I think is a good idea for him to be leading Canada. Whereas Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, he's solid as a rock. This man is so sound on everything, and I really would like him to be leading Canada. Trump is basically re-energising Liberal vote. Even saw Trudeau's. He managed to help boost Trudeau's ratings by attacking Canada. Of course, at that point, look, I'm no fan of Keir Starmer, but you know what? If he dissed our Prime Minister and he dissed our country, well, then we come back, because it's like if you want to criticise a member of your family. Go, they're awful, blah, blah, blah. Someone else does it. Whoa! That's my family member. That's how it works. And it is how every country works. And Canadians who are fairly sort of, people-pleasing kind of people, they're not going to put up with it.
No, they're not. Trump has done something which I never thought possible, to make Trudeau look competent.
I know.
That's quite impressive.
Such an awful human being as well. Such a bad human being.
He sends his best.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, God, just imagine having to be married to him. I'm a feminist. I'm a feminist in a blackface. Oh, God, shush. Justin, shush. You're a little rich kid who just feels you're entitled to anything. Shush, go away. Glad he's gone. But this is the thing I don't understand. Treating Canada even worse than treating China. China is a hostile nation state who economically has been bombarding the world and America with cheap subsidised goods, which no one can compete with because they use slave labour and coal-fired power stations and the like. That's fair enough. But blaming Canada for the fentanyl problem in America, that's not. It's not even. It's like a tiny percentage comes through the Canadian border. Blaming them for immigration. Well, no, that's coming through Mexico. I don't know why he's treating a close ally state. Canadians, by the way, went and fought and died in Afghanistan for America after 9/11. I don't know why he's treating Canada like that. I don't know why he's including us in the trade tariff war either, but he is.
I think he's just spreading it around, isn't he? And seeing what he can get away with. And that seems to be President Trump's MO, that he will put it out there, see what happens, and then either
throws the grenade in.
Exactly. And then either reverse the situation, say, well, I didn't really mean that, and then go on to something else. And that's what he does. He doesn't take any shame in changing his mind.
No.
Most leaders don't like the U-turn. They get absolutely ripped to pieces for it. But with President Trump, he can just
even when he was asked about you called Zelensky a dictator. And he goes, "Did I say that?" I mean, yeah, you literally said that, and it's on video. I mean, that's the thing. It's just sort of, it's very, very weird. I mean, and so were we all supposed to pretend you didn't say that now?
Exactly.
We're in very, very weird territory there. Can I also just ask, I mean, allied to Russia and Ukraine and all of that as well, very interesting development today, which came before we came on air today. We know there's been the arrest of the captain of the container ship that crashed into the tanker that was carrying fuel for the US military in the North Sea on Monday morning. Police have arrested the captain on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Again, huge big tanker crashed into. It was anchored, parked, I think is your technical maritime term earlier. I don't know.
I'm not a maritime
my dad sails and I always go like, I don't even know.
Understand.
It's the front and the back and the left and the right. I won't even play on that front. But you could see it. I mean, you could easily see it. Your radar. Anyone. Your job is to make sure someone is on watch and prevent these sort of things happening. But now we learn that the captain is not just a Russian national, and most of the crew were either Russian or Filipino nationals, according to the shipping company Ernst Russ. But it turns out the captain actually trained at the elite Russian Naval Officer School. Now, there's going to be some questions asked. The conspiracy theorists are going to be out in force on this one.
They certainly are, and I've seen some of it already. You know, when you flick through social media and you see this come up over the last 24 hours, it has been an absolutely burning issue. And it's the plot twist that none of us ever really saw happening. We thought they might have a hand in it, but to understand that this is a trained individual,
we don't know
with potential links to the Russian government. And we don't know. This is all alleged. We don't, until the facts come out, I think we have to be a little bit careful. But something doesn't smell quite right.
It's all very bizarre, isn't it? Another story I wanted to get to, front page of The Sun today. A senior aide to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has been accused of exposing himself to a 13-year-old girl and then following her. This is Sam Gould. He's a 33-year-old. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of indecent exposure on Monday after the incident in Romford in East London. He appeared at Barkingside Magistrates Court. Basically, he also pleaded to another count of indecent exposure, flashing a 25-year-old woman last month in Hornchurch. He's a councillor on Redbridge Council. He hasn't been forced resign from that job. You're elected councillor, same as if you're elected MP. But he's resigned from West Streeting's constituency office, where he worked as a senior caseworker. And the Health Secretary said, "There's no words to express my horror that a mother and her daughter have been put through the ordeal, and will have to deal with the trauma of it for some time to come." What happened is this 13-year-old girl walks past him. He's got his trousers down and he's exposing himself and having a good time, shall we say, in his car. She sort of looks in horror. He sees her. She runs away. He then gets out of the car and follows her. She's so terrified. She bangs on the door of houses, said, "Help me, help me." Another motorist passes, sees his, basically takes down the licence plate of the car, realises something's going on and goes to her help. Absolutely terrifying. But the key thing here is looking at the MO, people, like, one of the key things, people talk about flashers and people like that. There's no one's actually harmed, you haven't actually committed violence. Terrified the living daylights out of this girl, following her. Crucially, most people who sexually abuse, sexually assault have at some point flashed. Most flashers don't go on to do that, but reason why you need to always report a flasher and identify them, you need to get them in the system. That first warning early on, but get them in the system so they're in the system, so if and when they do commit sexual assault, they are in the system and can be traced. But crucially, very unlikely that he has done this. This is the first time he's done this. Well, we know it's already a second incident. That he's just happened to have been caught for 2 of them. Just happened, really? And that he would follow a girl in that circumstance, wouldn't have been frightened himself and just driven off. That suggests to me that, having covered an over of these cases, that he's done this many times before. How has he not been caught before? Again, look, we're streeting. You're not going to know that one of your staff is doing something like this, and quite rightly expressed outrage, and obviously wouldn't have him on his staff if he'd known. But there are far too many of these people around. This guy has gone in with West Streeting as an MP when he's visited schools.
Yeah, and that's a really frightening thing. He's had access into places where there are vulnerable people.
A position of trust.
And as a local councillor, you will have respect in a community, you will have access to places where there are vulnerable people, young people, elderly people. And no checks are have been maintained on him.
But by the way, added to this, the Labour Party is still in favour of men who identify as being women, i.e. trans women, which are just trans-identified men, of being allowed into women's only spaces.
Wow.
Here's the thing, Claire. Is there a reason why women and girls don't want men in our toilets, in our changing rooms, we've talked about a gym, a gym yesterday. Is there women's refuges, prison cells? Is there a reason why women didn't want those men in their room? Because we don't know which men are going to be doing things like that.
Exactly. So don't put them in. But we know what a woman is, and unfortunately, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom doesn't.
Apparently not. Well, again, should we have our weekly check? Should we have a little weekly check for our penises? Nope, still haven't got one. Just going to keep doing it until the Prime Minister of this country comes to his senses and realises that 0.1% of women in this country do not have a penis. That's what men have. That's the difference between men and women. But there we are. I'm old-fashioned like that. 11:19 is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do get in touch about anything. Well, if you're a woman, you want to do your weekly penis check on air, do let us know. Can't do it on video, obviously, but do get in touch. I'd love to get your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Have your say on anything that we're talking about, including Ukraine. I know a lot of you still want to talk about reform woes, because again, I just want to get them all in a room and bang their heads together. Some choice words would be used. I'd love to do it on air. I'm not sure I could use a lot of the words on air, but I think a lot of people are tearing their hair out. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Get in touch. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
scumbags like Carl Clifford, I mean, I don't believe he should be allowed to live, but that's just my opinion. But I'll tell you what, we have a country that seemingly bends backwards. What are we hearing from the Sentencing Council? Oh, if you're a different colour or a different race, are you worried about your sexuality? You think we should be softer? I'll tell you, pieces of crap like Carl Clifford should be dragged from their cells up the stairs by their hair, if needs be, on their hands and knees, and be made to face the families of the people whose lives they utterly destroyed. I think it is an absolutely disgusting rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:24 is the time. Let's get some of your messages coming in of whether you're hopeful for the Ukraine war to end or not, and tell us why you are. This after Trump says that he's calling on Putin to agree to a 30-day ceasefire, saying it takes two to tango, after Zelensky backed a US peace plan for Ukraine. Not that I'm sure the Ukrainians felt they had any choice about it. Phil says no aid, no arms, no NATO, no EU sabre rattling. If the West stops poking the bear, there will be no problem. Oh, Phil. Oh, I love you, Phil, for your wonderful faith in lovely Uncle Vlad in Moscow. I mean, literally, you're delusional. I don't mean to disrespect, you're delusional. If you think that Vladimir Putin won't come up with some other reason, honestly, there's no way in the world that Vladimir Putin is just going to be like, absolutely fine, not an issue. Henry says, I'm not hopeful. Just look at all the Russian propaganda. The Kremlin won't be happy until the so-called Nazi regime in Kyiv is removed. Yeah, indeed, there's no way. But again, to be fair, Donald Trump feels the same way about Zelensky, does he not, Claire Pearson, who's still with us in the studio? Yeah. Because Zelensky wouldn't help him out when he was trying to get dirt on Hunter Biden. Yeah, so, he treats him in the same way, doesn't he? Yeah. William says if Trump can pull this off, he really will deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, which I'm sure is one of the reasons he wants... Well, fair enough. I mean, Obama got given a Nobel Peace Prize before he'd done anything, and he didn't actually bring about peace. Which is why it's been so devalued, and that's why I sort of turn my nose up at it. It's a nonsense prize. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to the phone lines. Andrew's on the line in Hertfordshire. Hello, Andrew.
Good morning, Julia. Good morning, Claire. Julia, your voice, if it falls any more octaves, you'll sound like Eartha Kitt.
Thank God. I think I've actually got a cough button. Literally, it says cough on it, and I can just sit there and just cough quite happily while other people are talking. But you don't. Hopefully, most of the time, don't hear that on air. But yeah, I'm doing my best.
Yeah, we'll get well soon. Now, look, the Trump thing's interesting. Remember, it's not about peace between Russia and Ukraine. It's about what's good for Trump. So if you look at what's been announced, Kiev apparently. They've signed up to a ceasefire. Yeah. Actually, what's probably happened, if we take a step back, Trump wants the rare earths. Yeah. Zelensky has negotiated those away to Trump. So Trump's happy. He can go to the American people now and say, Biden gave them arms. Yeah. I've got rare earths. Now we've put it to Russia. And Putin's not going to sign anything. And you've been very good on the useful idiots that have been calling in relation to that. Putin's not going to sign anything, but now Trump has got currency. Yeah. What he can say is, I've got rare earths, I've got money, we will supply Ukraine because we're protecting American assets. And he's got a narrative there that makes him look a hero. Do you think he's looking for a way out? Because I wonder, like with Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State, and others, that actually they are much more supportive of Zelensky in Ukraine. They understand the threat from Putin more than Donald Trump does. They don't trust him as far as they could throw Putin. No, I'm with you 100%. But the reality is, remember, Trump has to be brilliant in 4 years. Because he has to go at the end of that. Even he can't stay. Yeah. So he wants a quick resolution, but he wants to be a hero. And in all things in sales, the key thing is when you're selling to someone, make them the hero. So if Trump's the hero here and Zelensky enables that, it's good. Yeah. And in relation to reform, it's a brilliant British thing, Julia. the ability to seize defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yes. I know. I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. But again, no dent in the opinion polls just yet. So we'll wait and see how that works out. Andrew, thank you for that. Another call, actually, from Phil in Hull, waiting on the line. Phil's called up on 0344 499 1000. Phil, you want to talk about reform. I mean, that story is not going away this week, is it?
No, unfortunately. Good morning, anyway. Good morning.
Good morning.
I would be tearing my hair out if I had any. But the two protagonists in this...
Yeah.
People are ringing in and saying, taking sides, saying this, that, and the other about, and I'm giving up my membership, and I'm not going to do this and not. No one knows what the outcome of all this is. Nobody knows whether these inquiries are true, false, or whatever.
The allegations made against Rupert Lowe, he's denied, obviously.
Yeah, but some of the things that Rupert Lowe, I quite liked, in all honesty. The KC said, not true, I didn't say that, I haven't told him that. So that's one thing that's been debunked.
Yeah.
And if by any chance this suggestion that Rupert goes to Conservatives, well, they certainly won't be taking me with him.
I can't believe, and the Conservatives have said they're a broad church. I find it very unlikely they'd be taking Rupert Lowe, to be honest with you.
Well, actually, I think they'd take anybody at the minute, wouldn't they? You know, they're really struggling, aren't they? And the other thing is, whatever tribe you're in, there's always one chief and the rest of the Indians. Yeah. If you're in government or in opposition, you don't go off.
This is the issue. People say, oh, well, it's all about Nigel Farage. Well, yeah, it is. He started the party. The reason the party did so well in the elections was because it was him. OK, partly Tories doing badly, etc. But it is. The party is Nigel Farage. That is the reality.
But if you see anyone interviewed who's in the shadow cabinet or the cabinet, and you ask them about something that's not within their brief, they refer you back to.
Yeah.
And all their speeches are cleared by number 10 or whatever.
Absolutely.
You can't just go off and say what you like about this. And if someone says to you, no, don't say that, then you must assume that they would take heed and not say whatever they're going to say.
And again, Nigel Farage is urgent. There's a big debate online about, oh well, you know, he's just, you know, he's moving back to the centre ground. Like, well, no, he's not moving back to the centre ground as far as I can tell. He's just saying let's not focus on certain topics when we've got to widen our appeal, which is because there's just no point being a protest vote.
No, well, the other thing is, as regards the Tommy Robinson thing, I don't think, with all due respect to him, who was in prison in solitary confinement, I believe, at the minute, following him or his line won't help you with the general public, because the opposition straight away say, look at this, look how right wing, look at this, look at that, and even Musk's endorsement.
Yes.
I mean, he did the AfD in Germany. Yeah. I mean, they've got some absolute nutcases in that.
Yeah, I was very impressed that Nigel actually stood firm against Elon Musk on that issue, on Tommy Robinson. Again, Tommy Robinson is not, he's not a political prisoner. He's in prison because he broke the law repeatedly in breach of a court order. I mean, it's simple as that. And he's been in solitary confinement for his own safety. Now, the fact that he has to be in solitary confinement for his own safety is an absolute travesty of a failure in our justice system, what goes on behind bars. But he ain't a political prisoner. Phil, thank you for that call. Appreciate that. Claire Pissell, do you think that Rupert Lowe would be welcome in the Conservative Party?
I don't think he'd actually really want to join it.
No, why would you be with Reform if you could have been the Tories all along?
And he used to be Conservative, but then he went to Reform and now he wants to come back. No, I don't buy it at all.
But they wouldn't want him back, would they?
I wouldn't have thought so. I really wouldn't have thought so. The Conservative Party has issues of its own without adding to it with somebody of that character.
They'd appeal a lot more to a lot of voters if they did have Rupert Lowe. Again, I really like both guys. I think they both talk a lot of sense. I need people to put their egos aside and do work for the common good. Anyway, the offer to come into a room and bang your heads together, chaps, over a good bottle of claret is still there. 11:32 is the time. Well, we'll find out what my next guest thinks about that in just a couple of moments. He's the Tory MP Shadow Crime and Policing Minister, Matt Vickers, and he's going to be talking about some of the extraordinarily soft sentences that are being handed out to prolific repeat criminals. What on earth is going on? Oh, we haven't got enough space in our prisons. There's a solution to that, folks. Build more prisons. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 11:35 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Claire Pearsall still with me. Get your thoughts on what my next guest has to say. I'm going to talk about crime right now with Matt Vickers. He's a Conservative MP and Shadow Crime and Policing Minister. Very good morning to you, Matt.
Good morning, Julia. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I just want to ask first of all your reaction to the sentencing of the Crossbow killer, Carl Clifford, yesterday. Extraordinary words spoken by John Hunt, the man who, the BBC commentator, not many people know and love, who lost not only two daughters but his wife, and thankfully another daughter still survives, wasn't at home. But the most horrific killing and rape, of course, of the daughter who was the ex-girlfriend of Carl Clifford. And John Hunt said in his victim impact statement, remember, to your dying day, there will be no release for you, Kyle. The screams of hell, I can hear them now. They're going to roll out the red carpet for you, talking about the killer as callous, cowardly and vindictive. Incredible words. I think many of us could feel, the thought that if we'd lost, as he said, 3/4 of his family to this man. This man is in a wheelchair, having attacked himself with a crossbow himself. He's behind bars. He's never going to be released. But he was not forced to come to court yesterday. He was not forced even to watch the victim impact statements and the sentencing on video footage, because the judge said, well, he's in a wheelchair and just thought it was inappropriate. I thought the Tories, when they were in power, were going to change the law. So if you were found guilty of a crime, you had to attend your sentencing and you had to hear what the victims had to say. Why has that not happened?
Yeah, when you look at that case, what an absolutely horrific situation to have endured. For a family now trying to carry on in light of what's gone on, that creature should be locked up for as long as possible, and he should have been marched into that courtroom yesterday. He's an absolutely vile individual, sick monster, should have been locked up for as long as he's getting locked up for, and should have been forced to come in and listen. It was something that was coming forward in the criminal justice bill that was coming forward in the last government. Obviously, election came, it didn't make its way through the House.
That's pretty much everything, virtually everything that we want done. Where Tories go, oh, well, we were going to do that, but then this election miraculously appeared. 6 months earlier than it needed to be.
It was in a bill that was coming through the House. It would have been on the statute book by now. It's not, but there is a bill coming forwards now. We're going to make sure that such an amendment goes on it. I understand the government have now said that they will look at this and will consider it and consider putting it forward themselves. And it's the right thing to do. It needs to happen. Families who go through these things, those monsters deserve to listen to what they've done and the impact that it's had on these families.
Well, I have to say, I offered my services to head to the court and to drag him by his hair myself into the court. I don't understand why that isn't done. When he's a guilty man, he doesn't get a choice about where he goes, as far as I'm concerned. No. There we are. Matt Vickers, thank you for that. Now, one of the things you're highlighting today is, frankly, the hardened thugs and even sex attackers who are making a mockery of justice. These are some statistics that have been identified showing just the extraordinarily low sentences that even serious offenders and indeed multiple repeat offenders are getting. Tell us what you found.
Well, 10% of offenders are responsible for half of all crime. This isn't people this is people who literally go out day and night to cause chaos on our streets and cause harm to everybody. They go out again and again, they get a slap on the wrist. And now the Labour government are looking at getting rid of some of those short sentences. Actually, we should be going completely the opposite way. These hyper-prolific offenders who constantly are in and out of prison they're dregs of society who constantly cause harm to others, who are thieving, who are doing all these vile things. They should be going away for longer. We need to look at actually not slackening off the time that people are going to prison and losing some of these short sentences. We actually need to be giving these people longer sentences and put them away for much longer.
But we can't, of course, because we haven't got any space in our prisons. And there was a party that was in power for 14 years. I can't remember what they were called, but they might have had some time to build some more prisons, mightn't they?
I think you've got to look at what happened with the prison service. Of course, there was two reasons there was huge pressure on the prison service. One is because we toughened up sentences.
You did.
We started putting
people did start serving longer sentences. But
we started putting people away for longer. That causes pressure on the prison service.
But you didn't think of building new prisons to account for that.
Well, we did. We did put prison places in place. So what happened?
How many?
Two things happened that created the pressure. One was that we started putting people away for longer, and I think the government was right to do. I wasn't a minister at the time. I think the government was right to do that. We also, during the pandemic, made the decision that the court would carry on, that we would keep those people in prison. We wouldn't start slackening things off just because because of the pandemic, we would carry on. And I think that was the right thing to do as well. Of course, that created pressure on prison places. We got to the point where, well, we had the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian ages. We built 13,000 more places in our prison system. That was the right thing to do. Of course, we need more places. The Labour government have made the decision to let people out early. The early release scheme was a choice. We were holding it together.
The Tories, if you'd been in power at the same time, you would have faced exactly the same pressure and you'd have done exactly the same thing.
We would not. I would not have been walking through those lobbies to support that. I can tell you that for now.
It wasn't a vote. It wasn't a vote.
The other problem that we need to solve is actually a huge proportion of our places are taken up by foreign national offenders.
Yep.
Hopefully, you were watching the news yesterday and you saw the commitment from this party, from this leader, this minister, that we will deport all foreign criminals. If you come to this country and you take the mick, you offend on our turf, you should be going back. And you know, if you're a country that refuses to take back your own offenders, we're going to remove your access to visas to come to this country. That's the negotiation.
I mean, you know what? That sounds great, and let's cheer it all on. Reality is, it's always been the policy that foreign criminals should be deported, and yet most of them aren't. It's always
after you're in prison with various delays.
Yeah, but also, if India don't take back a particular a prisoner, you're not going to end, you know, the hundreds of thousands of visas that India gets over one prisoner they don't take back. It's not going to happen. These are great words and they sound fabulous, but it's not going to happen.
It is going to happen. It is going to happen because at the next election, we're going to get elected. Kemi's going to be the leader. I'm going to be a minister, and we're going to do it. We're committed to it. It's our policy.
I mean, I'd love it if it did happen. I think British people would be cheering it on. The trouble is, as you know, on a lot of policies, and again, as presenters like me come back at you on this and say, that sounds great. Why didn't you do it while you're in office? Now I know Kemi Badenoch wasn't the leader, and you weren't in that role. But a lot of people just say, look, no, but you talked the talk on this stuff for 14 years and didn't do any of it, and now you're complaining about it and saying, but this time we mean it.
I wasn't there for 14 years, but what I will say is there's a full policy platform behind this. As well as that, we've also talked about disapplying the Human Rights Act from all immigration cases. And you know, these things, they're actually amendments that we're going to vote for in there. That is going to happen. We are going to vote on this. We're going to vote on disapplying the Human Rights Act from immigration cases because the number of these stupid, ridiculous judgments that prevent, I mean, chicken nugget gate, where some bloke's kid doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets, so he shouldn't be deported. That is balmy. We need to do more to solve this. We need to stop giving judges license to go out there and create their own laws. If the British people elect a government, the government should make the decisions and be accountable for it.
Well, yeah, and I want to come on to that with the sentence guidance, but certainly some of the cases that have been highlighted in this, in some of these just extraordinary cases where prolific criminals haven't been given proper sentences. And it was a campaign group, Crush Crime, who've exposed what they call a frankly dangerous trend in the courts, seeing hardened criminals given an easy ride. That's what Robert Jenrick, the Justice Secretary, has said. But looking at a domestic abuser, 11 convictions for 13 offences against previous partners, handed just 9 weeks imprisonment after assaulting his fiancée. A man, a pervert who sexually assaulted 3 schoolgirls in one afternoon at a city centre, only getting 15 months in jail. Other people, again, who've just getting, basically less than 2 years, even though they've got offence after offence after offence which they've committed. I mean, people really have had enough. Do you think that British people can trust you guys, though, if you did get back into office, that you would deal with this and you tackle it? Bearing in mind, we've seen, shoplifting all but legalised to all intents and purposes under 200 quid under
That's wrong.
Tory
That's
watch.
wrong. I need to stop you on that. 90% of offences that are charged for shoplifting are under 200 quid. That isn't right. Any police force out there who's telling you we can't charge someone because something's under 200 quid
I said effectively legalised. If you want to talk to the shopkeepers in my local high street, and they will tell you that no police officer turns up, and even when they've literally got the person, they'll face an assault charge. If they've got the ID of the person, they know who it is, no charges are brought. These people often go into court, they get fined, and the fine is less than the value of what they've stolen. That happened under the Tory watch.
I disagree with the 200 quid thing because I think it's wrong, and I think we shouldn't give the police the opt-out of saying that under 200 quid is not a thing. It should be a thing, and actually the responsibility is there on the police to come out when they're called. Taxpayers, businesses who contribute in tax towards the funding of the police force should deserve that service. As you may know, I had a big scrap about protecting retail workers to make it a statutory aggravating offence. We're now bringing a standalone offence. It's the right thing to do. We should actually be going further. One of the measures that's in the bill that we had going through that Labour have removed from the new bill is around the responsibility. So if you're a prolific offender, if you've a repeat offender in that space, i.e. shoplifting, assaulting retail workers, we said that a judge should have to either put a tag on your ankle, ban you from the shopping place, or impose a curfew as part of your sentence.
I mean, they must just be, trembling with fear at that point. Put them in prison.
Yeah.
Put them in prison.
Well,
After a certain number of offences, you go to prison
for a long time. But I'm saying while you're
time.
waiting for that to happen, you should be locked up. If you get some of these community services, you should be banned from going to that shopping place.
Listen, I had my handbag stolen on June the 1st last year. I'm still waiting for the CPS to make a decision about whether or not they're even going to charge the guy. He's on video. I provided the video, obviously, of it, but there we are. We'll see. I'll keep you posted on that, everyone. What do you make of the Sentencing Council? They've come back to Shabana Mahmood, the Labour Justice Secretary. She apparently was shocked and outraged to discover the Sentencing Council was suggesting that if someone is of ethnic minority, a religious minority, claiming to be trans or any other apparently minority community, I don't know what they are, that they would be, the judge would basically be required to get a sort of pre-sentencing information on them, a pre-sentencing report, which nearly always means that you get mitigating factors and you get a lower sentence. This apparently was to address the fact that some ethnic minorities are getting more likely to get custodial sentences than others. Now, she said basically this is unacceptable to her. She's written to the Sentencing Council. They've written back and said, we're independent. You don't get to tell us what these guidelines should be. I can understand why Sentencing Council and magistrates and judges want individual say over individual cases, because that is judicial independence. But surely the guidelines and the law and the rules around sentencing should be up to accountable elected officials. I mean, members of Parliament and ministers, no?
It is entirely unacceptable. As I understand it, I think that the Lord Chancellor was actually consulted twice before this guidance went out. We've now got 20 days or something before it kicks in. It cannot be allowed to go on. Whatever needs to be done in this place to prevent it has to happen. We cannot have the two-tier justice system that we've talked about for a long time and is now being evidenced in guidance. It's actually in black and white there for all to see, a two-tier justice system. What does that say for the police officers out there putting their lives on the line now when they go to pull somebody up? Is that really going to instill confidence and allow them to act when people think the decisions are being made based on the colour of someone's skin? It is utterly unacceptable. It undermines everything about our justice system, everything about what's right and wrong in this country, actually, if you allow people to face different consequences based on the colour of their skin.
OK, just finally, Rupert Lowe has been ousted as a Reform MP, still sitting in Parliament. Came out on the green benches behind his former colleagues yesterday. Would he be welcome in the Conservative Party?
I loved the vision earlier of you being the peacemaker and solving it all, the queen of diplomacy. Who knows? You might be able to sort them out.
But maybe some of these men need some bit of straight talking.
Well, perhaps. If they were actually, Julia, you should be running. You should get in here, sort us all out. I reckon.
I told you, I'm holding out for Empress and nothing else.
You deserve it. You deserve it. I reckon. I mean, we're a broad church as a party. That's part of our strength.
How broad?
I don't know that Rupert's made any inquiries about joining us. We'll let them get on with their own drama and whatever's going on Twitter. We'll get on with a job in here of laying these amendments to try and apply the Human Rights Act, etc., etc. We're getting on with the job of trying to make this legislation fit for purpose, and we'll let them go on with the psychodrama on Twitter.
All right, yeah. No psychodrama going on behind the scenes of the Tories, of course, wink, wink. Anyway, Matt Vickers, Conservative MP, Shadow Crime and Policing Minister, thank you for that. Very quick word from Claire Pearce.
I like Matt Vickers enormously. I think he is very good, but should we look at what the policies are from the Conservative Party? Yeah. I think he needs to sort of row back on that a little bit. And considering that we get rid of foreign national offenders already.
Yeah, we're supposed to do it. We still don't do it again.
Precisely.
I just think an awful lot of people just simply don't trust anything the Tories say. They've got a lot of trust to rebuild. 11:49 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Up next, going to talk to Justin Urquhart Stewart to try and make sense of this tariff war. How does it work? How might it end? weekend. What will it achieve, if anything? This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Yeah, maybe it's fitting the way that Manchester United have been run over the past couple of decades. That the new stadium looks a little bit like a circus tent. My wife actually, she's from Bognor Regis, and of course they've got a Butlins there. And she did say when the design came out yesterday with the three giant masts that are apparently going to be visible from the Peak District, looks like the big top at Butlins. So obviously there's always going to be a little bit of criticism. I'm torn. I'm a Manchester United fan. I'm a traditionalist. I love Old Trafford, but I understand financially why maybe it makes sense to build a new stadium.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's try to get to the bottom of what on earth is going on with the Trump tariff war. Let's talk to Justin Urquhart-Stewart. He's an economist. He's also chairman of the Regionally Investment Platform. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Always good to speak to you, see you, and see those wonderful red braces as well. I think this is an item we should actually be running for Donald Trump, because I'm not entirely sure he knows what a tariff is, given that he thought that our VAT, our sales tax, effectively, was a tariff on US goods, even though it's, of course, on all goods sold other than those exempt, like food and children's clothing. What is the point that Donald Trump is trying to achieve? What is he trying to achieve with his tariff war on countries like Mexico and Canada, the EU, the UK, with steel and aluminium tariffs, or aluminium as he calls it, and China? What is the point of that?
Well, you're absolutely right when he says he probably doesn't understand what a tariff is and never doesn't understand the implications it has. So basically what he's trying to do here is thinks he can actually protect US business and encourage US business by actually then doing away with unfair trading practices, as he would see it, on countries which are charging too much. So therefore what he can do is put on a tariff and it could be for a period of time. It could be on particular goods. It's very variable indeed. But every time you put a tariff on, you're putting a brake on the economy. It's because it's speed of money going through the economy is one of the key measures. And
because it is
tariffs,
basically a tax. It raises prices.
It raises prices. And the whole idea being, and we've done it in this country before, is that we want to protect what we regard as particular areas that we need to make sure we're doing ourselves. For instance, I mean, it could be something as straightforward as a Melton Mowbray pie, or it can be things like steel, coal, all those areas. And over the time, what's happened, and we can go right the way back to Victorian times, Sir Robert Peel, Tory leader, caused absolute uproar when he repealed what were known as the Corn Laws.
Yep.
And the Corn Laws there were to protect the landed gentry, who were actually able to charge really quite significant amounts for their corn and other such items. And they wanted to prevent cheap, heaven forfend, cheap food coming into this country. Yeah. And so by repealing these laws, actually it lowered the cost of food. It actually increased trade.
That's it. And the argument has been for a long time that, you know, free trade, with comparative advantage, so the country that can produce something cheaper, they're the ones who produce more of it and sell it. We all benefit from that. But the reality is we can have a lot of cheap goods, but we also lose a lot of jobs in first world countries where, you know, the cost of labour is higher, the standards might be higher. We've seen a massive outsourcing of jobs from America to Mexico, to China and the Far East, and that meant that although you get cheaper goods in the marketplace in America, a lot of people have lost their jobs or haven't been able to see their wages rise because they haven't got the access to jobs, they haven't got that competition. So it's the idea that if you stop steel and aluminium and other goods coming in cheaply, you're then going to bring those companies back to America and create those jobs.
That would be the theory of it. But of course, actually what happens internationally is you've got countries like China who do produce goods cheaper. Now, is that because they're able to do so because they control the industry, it's state controlled, or are they actually dumping it to try and actually make sure that a competition is wiped out and they can actually charge more in due course? Yeah. And the answer is, well, actually probably all of the above in different levels. Yeah. So you have to try and pick out those areas which are deliberately unfair and deliberately aimed at industries which we regard as being strategic. Steel is a very good example. We still need a steel industry, but people would argue, do we actually need the basic elements of actually the processing, creating steel, when actually we can actually recycle a lot of steel? We can't compete with the Far East on that. So the general view is, well, actually, don't try and compete. We're further up the food chain. We can do things more.
Well, the thing is, you're not further up the food chain if China then decides in a battle with over Taiwan that they're not going to supply to us. I mean, that's the thing. It's about being sort of economically, militarily secure as well, isn't it? So here's the thing. America imposes these tariffs, and there's been this sort of spat between America and Canada over, electricity tariffs at 25% from Canada and the like, and it does seem that Donald Trump kind of, well, I'll make it 50%, and then he backs down when he gets reciprocal tariff. We have not reciprocated with tariffs against the United States. Other countries have. The EU has done so to the equivalent value, although not over steel. But we do have some tariffs. And we don't have free trade with the United States right now. We don't have a free trade deal. What tariffs do we impose?
We're actually doing, it's a lovely idea to have a free trade deal with America, but Americans are extremely good at this. As far as they're concerned, they will protect their industries and they will actually use their power to do so. So even if you do end up with what you think is a free trade deal, actually you'll find it can be adjusted in all sorts of ways. You remember when we talked about food and chlorinated chickens and things like that? It becomes fearfully complicated. But all you can say as a generic issue, if you start putting tariffs on, you are taxing the economy. Now, not just Britain, you're taxing the global economy, which is already very weak indeed. The economy starts slowing up, and you're not putting a brake on the economy, you're breaking the economy. And the weakest ones will feel it first. And so when you look at countries like Russia, for example, we don't really know in detail what's happened to their economy, except they've got very high interest rates, very high inflation. It's in a terrible state. Why? Well, they're fighting a war, but also they have very tight tariffs on there and restrictions on trade, which have been very effective. But of course, Russia will never admit to any of that. So what do we actually have to do now? Well, we can either play with the president at his own game, which is a bit like poker, and you're actually just shouting back at the other people, and you're taking a bet on this, on the idea that in due course you'll be able to afford to come to an arrangement, and everyone stops shouting at each other. Unfortunately, what happens is, in the meantime, you've damaged the economy. Really, what you want to be able to do is get out of the newspapers, get out of the media, go and do it quietly on the side and say, this is why we want a fair trade. They may well still be tariffs, but both sides see it as a fair one.
Yeah, and again, there's no particular surplus or anything, so deficit with America, so it's perhaps easier for us to do a deal. So really you're saying Keir Starmer's probably doing the right thing by keeping quiet right now and not retaliating. We shall see. Justin Urquhart, Stuart, thank you. A rip-roaring race through that. I think we've all learned a bit more. Economist and chairman of Regionally Investment Platform. I'll get Claire Purcell's thoughts on that in just a few moments. More calls from you. Tom Tugendhat up next on Ukraine. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device, thank you so much for your company. Great also to still have Claire Purcell, former Conservative government advisor, with us. Just to tell you what's coming up in this hour, I'm going to talk more about Ukraine and that 30-day ceasefire that Donald Trump says he's agreed with. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, has agreed with Ukraine, now calling on Vladimir Putin to agree to it. Also, the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, has proposed plans for asylum seekers to face scientific age checks in an amendment to Labour's border security bill that's currently going through the Commons. The age tests could involve X-rays, MRI or bone scans, as already used, by the way, in many European countries, because of these bearded blokes turning up, heavy-set blokes turning up and going, yes, I'm 16. I mean, you're clearly 32, but we'll all play along and put you in a classroom full of 16-year-olds, which is what's actually happened. And also, it is that time of the week again. P&Qs has just started in the House of Commons. Same rules apply as always. Peter Cardwell is watching it, so you and I don't have to, but he'll bring us the highlights if there are any. I imagine there will be today a little bit later in the show. Claire Purcell, before we go to our next guest, I do just want to bring you back in on what Justin Urquhart Stuart was saying, the Trump tariff wars, because we've got Ukraine war ongoing, we've got Middle East, but there's actually this tariff war. But actually, this is creating a lot of animosity between countries, not just between America and Mexico and Canada, with which it is in, a free trade agreement until now. Renegotiated NAFTA, but when in his first term, but nevertheless a free trade agreement. But also with the EU have hit back. We have not yet hit back. But it is amazing to me how often when you look into this, you read the articles about this, no one explains what our current situation is. Now, we don't have tariffs with the EU at the current time, or with Australia, New Zealand. We're trying to negotiate a free trade deal with America, but we do have some tariffs on American goods, but at a pretty low level, a World Trade Organization type level. But it does seem to me that most people discussing this, and I'm going to include the President of America, don't actually understand tariffs.
They don't. I think that we need to have something sort of drawn up so everybody knows what they're talking about at any one time, because you just get people's opinion coming in and what they think they know. And I thought Justin was particularly good at explaining it, and especially when he pointed out there is no such thing as a free trade deal with the US. Those tariffs will come in different forms and different sanctions or whatever around the edge of
free trade deals often don't involve all goods.
Exactly.
And there is that need, isn't there? We've been sold this deal for a long time that actually, free trade is the future, as everyone's richer. Well, multinational companies get much richer. That's certainly the case. And we can get cheaper goods. And things like we got talking about the price of food in supermarkets and stuff. Actually, the price of everything we buy is so much cheaper than it was, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years. In terms of the white goods that we can have, the fridge freezers, the washing machines, cars, things, actually relative to income, they are all much cheaper, and that's because of mass production and because a lot of it has been basically offshored. It's now overseas, produced by people who are paid very, very little in very poor conditions in countries which, by the way, aren't using solar power. They're actually using reliable fossil fuels that are cheaper and more reliable. Funny that. But there is also that impact on our national sort of food security, our energy security, our military security, that we can't produce steel, we can't produce our own food enough to feed the country, or to make enough warships if we needed them in a war. We are putting ourselves at danger. But it also means jobs go, because it's all very well us buying cheap goods, but you still need to have a job to be able to buy goods.
Yeah, you do. And I think we've become too reliant on cheap goods. And if you just take one of your points just then regarding food security, what are we doing in our own country? The biggest act of self-harm by damaging the farming community.
Already massively damaged,
And looking like it's going to be even more when the Planning and Infrastructure Bill comes through and Angela Rayner can have a massive land grab on farmland. So I think that we need to look at getting our own house in order before we start looking at what the United States President is doing and criticising it.
Very fair point. Thank you very much indeed. Always good to get your thoughts on all these topics. Well, let's talk right now about what is going on with Ukraine. Let's talk to Tom Tugendhat MP, former Security Minister, who joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Tom.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
Very well. Well, I'm as croaky as I sound, but other than that, very well. Doing a lot better than the people of Ukraine, still under fire from Russian missiles and drones and the like. What did you make, first of all, of when you heard that an agreement of being done between the Americans and Zelensky's representatives in the meeting in Riyadh yesterday, that they would agree to a 30-day ceasefire, and the ball being basically put into the side of the court of Putin for him to agree? What did you make of that?
Well, look, first of all, let's just be clear. You, me, everybody else wants this war to end. The quick way for this war to end is for the Russians to stop killing the Ukrainians, right? We all know those are the facts, right? They just have to withdraw to their own borders, the borders that they agreed in 1994, that repeated in various different agreements under Putin in the 2000s, and that they violated. So that's point one. Point two is, look, I am glad there's a ceasefire that the Ukrainians want to make work. But I remain deeply concerned, because the reality is it's not the Ukrainians who caused this war. So they're not the ones who have to be convinced to stop fighting. It's the Russians. And, none of us have heard anything from Putin or from any of his acolytes, or even from some of his outriders on this. Now, what we do know is that some of the more right-wing, the sort of Russian Orthodox right-wing websites are already suggesting that a betrayal is on its way, which, does suggest that Putin might have problems delivering a ceasefire with his more nationalist elements. But let's see. I mean, the reality is we want this war to stop. We want the killing to stop. We want, people to get back to their lives, and for people to stop being killed in their beds.
But again, a lot of it does determine, is determined by the terms of any deal. Now, Marco Rubio has said today that he said we have had discussions on territorial concessions in Ukraine. He said the US hopes to have a positive answer on the ceasefire from Russia. Speaking in Ireland, he said they're urging Russia to end all hostilities so people will stop dying, so bullets will stop flying, so there is no military solution to this conflict. I mean, personally, I think that's utter tosh. Of course, there's a military solution, which is the West giving Ukraine enough aid that they can oust their invaders. But there we are.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, Julia, just to say I keep hearing there is no military solution to a conflict. What do you think the Second World War ended with?
Yeah,
it ended with a military solution. What do you know? Wars regularly end with military solutions. That's how many of them end, actually. And this whole sort of Corbyn type line that there's got to be a peace talk. No, the people who are being murdered should have the right to defend themselves and stop other people murdering.
Absolutely. Well, again, when we've had Donald Trump characterising Zelensky as dictator and the one who's a warmonger as opposed to Vladimir Putin, I mean, then we've got a very topsy-turvy world. But there is the difficulty, isn't it, in terms of what is Zelensky going to have to agree in return for a ceasefire deal. We know this mineral deal. I mean, frankly, at this point, neither here nor there. You know, fine, have the minerals. But they want the guarantee from either the Americans or well, rather the Americans plus the European countries. But if it doesn't look like the Americans, then the coalition of the willing that Starmer and Macron are putting together. But we've heard from the Russians, from what has been said, that they would never put up with any NATO troops from any NATO country in Ukraine. They also would like no NATO, well, demand no NATO accession for Ukraine. That's pretty much off the cards. America's made that clear. But also they'd want some sort of legal recognition, international recognition that, you know, Crimea and the Donbass are now Russian territory. That is something surely that not only Ukraine cannot agree to, but also the West cannot agree to, because it's basically a big win for Donald Trump at that point.
Well, look, we've got to be careful here, Julia. We can't be more Catholic than the Pope, right? If the Ukrainians can live with it, it's up to them. It's not up to us. They're not, you know, I know Russia wants to make them into a colony, but we don't. We want them to be a sovereign and independent state. And if they can live with territorial concessions, you know, that's up to them. It's not up to me. It's not up to anybody else. It's up to the sovereign people of Ukraine and their government and their organization. Right. The next question really is, what should we be pushing them to do? Now, my argument is very clear. We should be making sure that they have the appropriate latitude to negotiate, to make sure that their people are safe. Now, that doesn't mean I want to escalate, but it also means that I don't want to accept or tolerate that Russia has some sort of veto over sovereign states, as though they're sort of semi-colonies. You know, if a country wishes to join a trade agreement or a political alliance or a defensive alliance, it's up to them. I mean, you know, many people didn't like the fact that we voted to leave the European Union, but that was just up to us. Nobody else got to say on that. We decided to leave, and we could have decided to stay. We decided to join NATO. We could have decided not to. You know, this is what sovereign countries do. They decide to join or to leave different organizations. If the Ukrainians want to join NATO or the EU or anything else, and the other parties want to accept them, it's none of Russia's business. This whole rubbish that the people on the left, and in fact, sadly, some conspiracy theorists on the right now are spreading about NATO expanding, it's complete rubbish.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because we had a caller making that point. I get this constantly on social media now that, you know, it was NATO pushing its way into Ukraine, again, as if it wasn't Ukraine saying, oh, can we have your help, please? We're worried about the threat from Russia. But the idea that that was a provocation, and basically it's all Ukraine's fault, and it's all NATO's fault, it's all the EU's fault, and Putin wouldn't be a threat if he didn't himself feel threatened. What would you say to that?
It's total rubbish. I mean, it's total rubbish, and it's completely factually wrong. You can look at the history. In 2007, Putin kidnapped 2 border guards from Estonia. In 2008, he ordered the invasion and occupation of parts of Georgia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, still occupied since 2008. Around that time, people in Ukraine were so disappointed by the level of corruption in their government by Kremlin-sponsored oligarchs that you started to see this pressure to look west rather than to look east. Now, at that point, there wasn't really any talk about joining NATO, but there was talk about cooperating with the European Union. And that was stamped on so hard that you remember the Orange Revolution, as it was called, that was really stamped on very hard by pro-Kremlin apparatchiks who fired into the crowd and killed various people. Now, at that point, unsurprisingly, people felt even more threatened by Russia. And guess what? as they felt more threatened by Russia, they decided to look for support. Now, where do you look for support? You look for support from your neighbours. What's your neighbours' support group called? It's called NATO. Yeah. So they joined NATO, or sorry, they started to talk about joining NATO for exactly the same reason as Finland and Sweden did. Look, Finland and Sweden were neutral for 80 years, right? They didn't want to. They wanted to stay neutral. But because of what Russia has done, because of what Putin has done, they were left with no choice. So the idea that NATO is expanding, NATO, there isn't a thing, NATO. It's not an empire. It's not it's not an organization. It's not a state. It's not expanding. Free countries are freely associating with other free countries for protection. We call that standing together NATO. You can call it whatever you like, but that's all it is. It's free standing together.
Are you convinced that if Russia did feel that it got away with its actions in Ukraine, although again, still an abject failure, people are talking about Ukraine winning. I mean, I'm sorry, about Russia winning when 3 years on they've taken, another 10% of the country. They already had Crimea in 2014. I mean, that over a much smaller state, a huge military might of Russia, and they can't even take Ukraine, for goodness sake. But even if they do take a big slice of Ukrainian territory, if they decide to move on to another nation, are you fully sure that the Article 5 of the NATO treaty, where we would actually, attack on one is attack on all, that America, that there are other countries in Europe would come to the aid of a country like, say, Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania if they were attacked by Russia? Because I'm not sure I would trust NATO anymore.
So, look, let's look at Article 5. An Article 5 commitment is a promise to respond. It doesn't necessarily mean a military response. It can be responding in different ways. Am I certain that NATO countries would choose to support a NATO country that had been attacked? Yes, I am. I'm not in any doubt at all. If Estonia was attacked, I'm in no doubt that Finland, Sweden, Germany, Britain would come to the support of Estonia. Would the United States put in soldiers? Maybe not. Might just provide military support, might just provide weapons and ammunition. It doesn't have to be the same response from everybody. But let's not forget, the only time Article 5 has been invoked was after 9/11. We all came to the aid of the United States. But let's also be clear that, Putin himself was perfectly relaxed about NATO when Russia had observer status in NATO. Putin was perfectly relaxed about NATO when NATO countries clubbed together and assisted in refloating the Russian economy in the 1990s. Let's not pretend that the West has been anti-Russian. It's complete rubbish. We have supported Russia. The problem is people like Putin have destroyed it. You said it was about 10%. Actually, to be fair, the Russians now currently control 19.2%.
No, but they already had Crimea.
Well, it's actually worse than that, Julia. They now control 19.2. When they invaded, those first few weeks of the invasion, just after February 22, they controlled 19.6%. So in the last 3 years, they've lost 0.4% of Ukraine for the loss of about 700,000 to 800,000 Russians dead and injured. Yeah. Now, if you want to be pro-Russian, and I do, you want this war to end, you want those kids to come home, and you want Russian mothers to be able to look after their sons, because frankly, what Putin is doing is he is murdering Russia, he's destroying the economy, and he's making absolutely true what Brzezinski said back in the 80s. He said Russia has always had a strategic choice. It can be a partner of Europe or a vassal of China. And what Putin has chosen is to be a vassal of China.
Is any deal that Putin might agree to in terms of a 30-day ceasefire and perhaps moving on to something long-term, whatever the terms of that deal are, is anything that he signs worth the paper it's printed on? Because that was the point Zelensky was making to Donald Trump before he sort of went off on one in the Oval Office, that he's reneged on every agreement he's ever signed in the past. Would you trust anything that he signed or a word that he says?
No, not even slightly. But, this is where, perfectly understandably, President Zelensky is asking for support and possibly military assistance to ensure a ceasefire binds. And, let's not pretend this is some sort of, game of chess where two generals are fighting it out with their armies. Just look at how many people are dying in Ukraine, right? We saw an explosion in a tower block last night. A woman in her 40s was killed. Her 2 children were extremely seriously injured, and a further dozen or so people were really seriously injured. We saw a school hit. We saw a hospital hit. This isn't some sort of, World War I fighting in the trenches between soldiers and it's sort of all remote from the civilian population. No, Russia is murdering Ukrainians in their beds. That's what they're doing. And we need to recognize that. So when Zelensky is asking for support, wouldn't we want support to make sure that you and me and others can go about our daily lives peacefully? Wouldn't we want that for our children? Of course we would.
Well, that's the extraordinary thing. What do you make of the proposal for a coalition of the willing and peacekeeping troops once their world's peace? Because, I mean, again, the response I get on social media is, oh, well, are you going to go and fight, are you, Julia? Are you going to send your child? Are you, it's all right for people talking about this, but not actually willing to go on the front line themselves. I mean, if it was for my own country, absolutely be willing to go on the front line myself. You've been on the front line. What do you make of that proposal?
So, look, it's too early to make any real comments about it, other than I'll say something I don't very often say. I think Keir Starmer's actually done rather well on this. I think he's led well and brought Macron and some of the other Europeans together. I think that is an achievement. Let's see what the detail of the proposal is before we make any final decisions, because it really does depend what's on the table. It depends what are we trying to enforce a ceasefire, or are we trying to just observe one? Are we trying to, deliver aid? Are we trying to, what are we actually trying to do? So let's see what the proposal is before we, make too many comments on it. But I do support the idea that the UK has a contribution to make in keeping Europe safe, because let's not forget, I mean, you're quite right to say, by the way, Julia, that of course we'd fight hard for our own home. I mean, that's obviously true. But it's also true that NATO is a huge luxury for us. It's effectively a 2,000-mile bumper east and south for us, which means that if any fighting starts, we've got a bit of a tripwire before it gets to us. Now, that is a huge luxury. But in order to have that luxury, countries like Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania need to know that we're with them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why on earth should they stand up and not see us get steamrolled later, right? So we're in this together, and it's a great luxury for the UK, but it means we have a responsibility too.
Tom Tugendhat, really good to talk to you. So, former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, of course, stood for the Tory leadership. I have to say, look, I agree with him very strongly on all of this, and he's someone who's actually put his money where his mouth is and actually picked up a weapon himself, which more than most of us armchair generals do. Claire Pearsall, it is interesting, as you put out, there's talk about this idea that NATO and Ukraine provoked this war from Putin. This is a narrative that is not only all over the internet, all over X in particular. Elon Musk says it's something that Elon Musk pushed, it's something that Donald Trump has pushed to Zelensky in the Oval Office. Do you think they actually believe this? That's just my thing. Do people actually believe this?
Well, I think they do, because they spout it as if it is actual fact, when what NATO is a mutual defence pact.
Yeah.
It isn't an
NATO
army.
has never invaded another country.
No, it wasn't. It was there to stop. It was there after the Cold War to stop Russian aggression and from Russia encroaching, or the Soviet Union encroaching into Europe.
And I wonder why people feel that again. I think the point about Finland and Sweden. I wonder why two neutral countries have decided to join in
after 80 years.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, I wonder what it was. It really is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm absolutely fascinated because so many people, on social media, I don't know how representative they are of. Well, I know how representative they are of the British people, because the British people have been very clear. The polls are very, very clear in terms of support for Ukraine and the support for Zelensky over Donald Trump. And a lot of people, again, even Reform UK voters, who have been massively supportive of Donald Trump before his re-election and his election since that day, and something I've been very supportive of a lot. I would say most of the things he's doing, but actually on this, no, I draw the line. But it does appear those people are not representative. But it's interesting, actually, our callers tend to be much more in favour of Ukraine, on Ukraine's side, whereas social media messages, I wonder again, it's the Russian bots. I do wonder. Many of the accounts where I get these messages were set up in the last couple of years, or they're little eggs, or Jane with 15 numbers afterwards. Some of them appear to be real people. If you look at the content they post, it just doesn't look like an ordinary a normal person's content. But you just wonder how widespread that is. But they do actually influence. I mean, if you're able to influence the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, then it's worthwhile you doing it, I suppose. But it is having an impact, and it is having an impact on this war. Absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with what Tom Tugendhat had to say? Because it's not like we're not having a little lovey little we all agree with each other because we're being paid by someone, or genuinely it's just what we actually think. I wouldn't have anyone on my show who doesn't say what they actually think, otherwise I can't be bothered with them. I'll always tell you what I think, whether you agree with me or not. But I just find it fascinating where people stand on this. I mean, if there was a ceasefire deal agreed with Putin, is his signature, is his word, is it worth the paper it's printed on? I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is a number to call. You can text the word talk to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. I forgot to say this at the top of the hour. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. We'll take a quick break. Lots more top guests coming up, including Ben Habib, former deputy leader of Reform. He's going to be talking to us about the plans for asylum seekers to face scientific age checks under the Tories. Yeah, I mean, Europe's been doing this for years. I don't know why we're suddenly thinking about doing it, why the Tories were in power for years and didn't do it. But also, what does he make of what is going on between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage at the top of the party? He's already made overtures to Rupert Lowe to form a splinter group. But is that the future, or is it yet another split on the right that will leave Labour in power for decades? That's up very soon. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Obviously, I followed on 9 months after Nigel stepped down from the leadership of UKIP, and I took on the leadership of UKIP. So, if you like, I was very much in that circle, and at one point I regarded Nigel as a friend. But with time, it was quite clear that that UKIP, subsequently the Brexit Party and Reform, have been a platform, a fundraising and support platform from which one man can project his politics.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:28 is the time. Lots of messages coming in about Ukraine and what Tom Tugendhat had to say. Something was posted before he was on the show. I'm asking if you're hopeful that the war will end after that 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky signed up to it. Will Putin? That's the question. Brian says, I'm sorry, but we all know Russia is going to rearm and then attack Ukraine again in another year or after Trump leaves office. I mean, Yeah. Benjamin says, am I the only one who thinks Russia has had to make zero concessions? Natalie says that Britain now needs to step up as soon as possible on defence and make sure we have an effective deterrent. Here to that. Theo says, I don't see why Russia would agree from their point of view at the moment. Alex says no, because this ceasefire is just an opportunity for Ukraine to rearm, and Putin knows it. Interesting point of view. Karen says, if Russia agrees, and it's a big if, Putin is not trustworthy, then has never stuck to a ceasefire yet. What he might do is agree, but actually use the time to regroup before attacking again, because that's what he does. Leslie, though, is hopeful. She says, Putin has respect for President Trump. It's great to see the US and Russia talk peace and alliance. Putin has absolutely zero respect for President Trump. I mean, he's just winding us around his little finger, isn't he, Claire?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, Putin knows how to play the game. He knows how to get what he wants, and he's going to continue to do so. He's not going to fawn over anybody.
Well, let's go to the phone lines now. David is on the line in Kent, reacting actually to what Tom Tugendhat just had to say. David, good afternoon, sorry. What do you want to say?
Good afternoon. First, obligatory disclaimer. Putin is not a nice guy. Russia is not a democracy. If you fall out, you say anything out of line there, you get sent off to a camp, right? Somewhere in Siberia. Okay, first obligatory disclaimer. But with that out of the way, regarding Tom Tugendhat and his comments, Tom conveniently overlooks the fact that in 2014, he didn't mention this at all, I did catch the end of it, but I don't think he did, that in 2014, a democratically elected and, inconveniently Russian-leaning government was overthrown in the coup, which was very much supported by the West, number one. Number two, how is Tom Tugendhat, what's the view, how is the United States on missiles being planted in Grenada, more recent, further back, Cuba, and indeed on Greenland? How would they be on that? The Monroe Declaration, not too keen on it, and yet Russia is surrounded by NATO. See, however, just refer to my first comment, not a nice bloke. But he doesn't get these things in perspective at all, Mr. Tugendhat. And I regard Mr. Tugendhat rather like that other chap who's in the 77th Brigade, who's something of a complete warmonger, awful individual.
I don't understand. Again, I'm a warmonger and an awful individual as well. But I mean, look, there was a coup in 2014, and yes, it was back for the West. But, however, there were then democratic elections, and the Ukrainian people decided what they wanted, and then they elected Zelensky. And again, he's not a dictator. Vladimir Putin is. You don't get killed if you stand against Zelensky in an election. There hasn't been an election since 2019 because they've been at war, and we didn't have elections during our Second World War either. But the key thing about this, again, there's this idea that Russia is surrounded by NATO. No, all of the countries that are threatened by Russia have joined NATO. It's the other way round.
I think going back further, though, it was an agreement, and it was never written down, that there wouldn't be an expansion to the east after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Well, again, there wasn't a plan. There wasn't a plan for Finland and Sweden to join. There wasn't a plan for Ukraine to join originally. But then they felt threatened because Putin made it really, really clear he does not acknowledge that these are sovereign, independent nation states.
But you go further back and say, well, the agreement was never to expand NATO to the east, and they feel threatened. I get that, but I can see also his point.
Okay, yeah, because his point is, I don't know why you feel threatened when I've threatened you. That's like someone holding someone by their throat against the wall and saying, I don't know why you've called the police to help you, or you've called your mates to help you. Why have you got me surrounded by people? Well, because you had me in a, you had your hand around my throat against a wall. That's why. That's what the Ukrainians and all the other nation states who face a threat from Russia, they've lived under Russian rule. They know what it means.
Yes, they very much do. That's true, especially Poland. But the Russians regard NATO as an offensive organisation, just as the United States would if I don't know. Let's take Grenada for example. I was there recently. If they were, one of the great concerns might have been that they might have had a rerun of Cuba, so they send the Marines in. Yeah. That's what happens there. Yeah. So,
but again, and countries have spheres of influence, and they do, and big nations can get away with doing this stuff. And America's committed some horrible atrocities over the years, as have Russia. But at the end of the day, if Russia wasn't the threat it is to Western democratic states, which Ukraine has only recently become, then they wouldn't face this threat.
But they don't regard it as.
That's because Russia has a completely, and Putin in particular, has a completely skewed idea of the world.
He may do, but that's his view.
Oh, I'm not denying that that's his view, but I'm just saying I'm not sure we Well, you know, again, you know, I mean, he could identify as trans. It wouldn't make him a woman. Do you know what I mean? I'm saying that's his view, and we have to realise, and I do understand that he would have chosen to see, you know, Ukraine wanting to join the EU and NATO as a provocation. But he sees democratic elections in a country in his sphere of influence as a provocation. One of the biggest issues he has with Ukraine is Ukraine was doing quite well and improving, and people were welcoming democracy and wanting to be involved with the West. He couldn't have that happen on his border when the Russian economy is such a basket case under his rule.
I'm not sure. I think that was following Zelensky. I think there was a lot of removal of rights from ethnic Russian people in east of Ukraine, and you know, so I don't think they were quite, you know.
What rights?
I don't know. The various, I suppose, their language and schools, and I think.
Well, the language again, you know, Russia wanted Russian to be its second official language, but the country is Ukraine.
Yeah, but a lot of people do speak. A lot of people
do. Yeah, you know why they speak Russian? Because you were required under pain of imprisonment to speak Russision. I mean, you know, if those people come from, you know, Eastern European countries, they were required to speak Russian.
I don't know. Well,
I do know because they were. But anyway, I'd love to talk to you for long.
Yeah, that's just right. So I mean, some element of it.
I really appreciate your call. Fantastic call. Thank you so much. I'm gonna have to leave there. 12:34 is the time because I'm gonna have to go to a break. I've got another caller. I will do my best to get to you, Andy, before the end of the show. But we're going to take a quick break now. Up next, going to be talking to former MEP, former Deputy Leader of Reform, Ben Habib. That's coming in a moment. Do stay tuned. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:37 is the time. Coming up, we're going to get Peter Cobble in the studio, Talk presenter, of course, and political commentator. He's been watching PMQ, so we don't have to. Tell us about any highlights. Claire Pearsall's still here. Get your thoughts on what my next guest has to say. He's Ben Habib, former MEP, of course, and former Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Very good afternoon to you, Ben.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. I do want to ask you about these plans for asylum seeker checks and something the Tories are looking at, something that I know people like you have been talking about for quite a long time. But I want to ask you first of all about what is going on with Reform UK. You've made it very clear in overtures to the likes of Rupert Lowe and others who are unhappy with Nigel Farage's leadership about possibly setting up a splinter group. You yourself were ousted from the deputy leadership when Zia Yusuf was appointed chairman and Richard Tice became deputy. Do you think the problem in UKIP, such as there is a problem, is Nigel Farage, or is the problem Rupert Lowe?
Well, I think you know the answer. The problem is Nigel Farage. And, you know, I've been biting my lower lip on saying that ever since I became aware of the problems with him because of his huge public persona. The easiest way to be trammeled in public opinion is to go up against someone like Nigel Farage, who commands the airwaves so competently, who's such a phenomenal campaigner. But the underlying and sad truth about Nigel Farage, and there are two truths here that need to be revealed if they haven't already been revealed through the low fracas, is that, first of all, Nigel is a narcissist and can't bear anyone sharing the limelight with him, you know, coming remotely close to his sort of levels of popularity. And I think Elon Musk's endorsement of Rupert Lowe would have been, you know, very damaging for Rupert. That's the first problem. And then the other problem, which I think is much more fundamental for the country, is Nigel isn't really one of us. He's not someone who believes in a sovereign, independent, prosperous United Kingdom. And you may roll your eyes at that.
I don't even understand why you're saying, why do you think, what does not one of us means and why doesn't he believe in that? He literally spent his entire adult life campaigning for that.
Absolutely. That was a convenient campaign. Now, this is going to sound very strange, and I knew you'd challenge me on it. It's going to sound very strange. It was a perfectly convenient campaign to fight because it gave him precisely what he wants, which is a flogging horse, if you like, while he maintains his, or created initially his persona and then, you know, used it to create a living for himself. But if you listen very carefully to what Nigel Farage has been doing in the last 6 months, he's pivoted unashamedly towards the centre ground, adopting, when I say the centre ground, by the way, there's no left or right. The left basically believe in the liberal global order, part of international institutions, dumbing down of our democracy, and the ridiculous extreme form of liberalism that we experience called woke. That's the left. And on the right, we have democratically minded people who believe in nation state sovereignty and democracy, etc. And Nigel is moving towards the left. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, he recruited a Liberal Democrat councillor. He put Charlie Mullins forward as a candidate. Charlie Mullins, just to remind people, is an avowed Remainer, still is an avowed Remainer. He said no jab, no job. That's an affront to people on our side of the debate.
I absolutely. There's no way that Chris Mullins should have a place in reform. But hold on a second. Yeah. Okay, look, for start.
But I can give you more examples.
Okay,
so, you know, Nigel's on the record saying he's not worried about the rate of demographic change in the country, that mass deportations of illegal migrants, he's against it. He's on the record saying a united Ireland is inevitable. That means he doesn't actually understand what the democratic unit of the United Kingdom of Great Britain is. And he says Brexit's done, when actually it's not done. We've left Northern Ireland behind, and you know we're hitched at the hip with the EU in so many different ways.
Let me come back to you, because I'm sure what he would say in a lot of these cases, and again, a lot of this would be my view as well, that actually, look, for a start, he could have made a lot more money just staying in the city as a trader rather than as an MEP. Okay, well that's fine.
He'd be out of a job by now because it's all been automated.
Well, yeah, but I think he probably would have made a lot more over the years beforehand. But either way, you say centre ground. Now, one of the battles between him and Rupert Lowe was that Rupert Lowe saying, I want to talk about, mass deportations. Now, again,
exactly.
I don't know why anyone should be opposed to mass deportations of people who've got no right to be here. It seems to me to be blatantly obvious. I think people are crazy not to support that. However, there is that argument about needing to not be a protest group, something that Rupert Lowe also criticised. We need to not just be a protest group led by the Messiah, were his words in the Mail, which apparently seemed to rile Nigel Farage. But the point is that, you need to appeal more widely, talking constantly non-stop about immigration is not the way to do that. You need to widen your appeal. You've already got those votes in the bag. You need to widen your appeal because that is how you win elections. That's not selling out. That's just a reality check, isn't it?
No, I completely agree with you that you don't have to bang on about immigration once you've made your policy on it clear. But Nigel's actually changed his policy on it, or if he ever had a policy of mass deportation, he's repudiated it. If he ever was concerned about the dramatically changing demography in this country, which he should be, he's changed his view on it. And so it's actually Nigel Farage who's coming forward and trashing his own narrative by saying things which, frankly, as I say, people on our side of the debate find an affront. It's Nigel who's doing the damage. Yes, we must talk about the economy. We must talk about deregulation. We must talk about ditching net zero, liberating British businesses, promoting the working class. All these things are incredibly important issues. But it's Nigel who keeps saying things that are actually damaging his own position.
There is the argument, though. No, but Ben, there is the argument that say, like Donald Trump. Donald Trump had a very strong a message to send about immigration and mass deportations, and also about anti-woke. But at the end of the day, cost of living. It's how pound in the pocket. Yeah. It's people's quality of life that matters to people, and it's about talking about those things. Well, here's the thing. We know there are big egos involved. Rupert Lowe's got a big... Let me finish. Rupert's got a big ego. He's been a very successful businessman. That's why he's very good at what he does. And Nigel Farage's got a big ego. Of course he does. You've got a big ego. Loads of the people have got big egos. However, here's the thing. Nigel Farage is reform. At the end of the day, the party isn't anything without him. Isn't this a case of, you know what, a load of big egos, a load of men, you need to suck it up for the common good, and you're not going to get everything you want, and not every party platform is going to be exactly what you want, but you're going to have to be, okay, you may not want to be as broad a church as the Conservatives, because that's everything from far left to the centre ground, but you might want to be a broader ground than you are, and you actually accept that there are going to be some things you don't agree on, some things you don't like that are said, but if you want to do the job of actually providing a proper, viable, alternative government in waiting for the British people to get sensible policies on immigration, on crime, on woke and all of that, you need to suck it up and put your egos aside.
No, it's nothing to do with egos. You said it yourself. Nigel Farage is reform. Reform is Nigel Farage. Unless that can change, unless reform is able to take on a number of other Samsons and stand them tall to make the case that needs to be made for a 180-degree change in the governance of this country, across the board, economically, socially, culturally, constitutionally, democratically, all of that, you need champions. You need people who are more than just a sycophant to Nigel Farage. And the problem
not being a sycophant.
No, I haven't finished.
Okay.
I let you speak, Julia. At the moment, reform is seen as Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage is reform. They are one and the same thing. And that is an unsustainable position for a party that wishes to form a government. You've got to have other big players in it, and Nigel will not allow that to happen.
I agree you need other big players, but at the end of the day, you have to toe the party line. It doesn't matter how big a beast you are.
It doesn't matter. The party line is damaging to the interests of the United Kingdom. He's putting Charlie Mullins forward as a candidate. He's got Nick Candy. On the day Nick Candy was appointed treasurer, he was singing the praises of Tony flipping Blair and that other idiot, Peter Mandelson, two architects of the liberal global order that has so damaged this country.
Well, you can argue that. You can argue that, but an awful lot of people who could likely vote for reform may well have voted for Tony Blair back in '97. So having got elected.
And they recognise that as a mistake. Nick Candy is still banging the drum for Tony Blair. Anyone who thinks Tony Blair is anything other than the devil to the United Kingdom is missing the point.
Well, then I'm missing the point, because I don't think Tony Blair is the devil, and I disagree with lots of things that he did.
Julia, we need to sit down over a long drink over that.
But this is the thing, Ben, is that, again, there's this purist side of things. You want to be like...
It's not purist.
That ain't going to get you elected. It's not going to get you into power.
I totally disagree. Where the British public are is that they want unashamed policies to save the United Kingdom.
I'm all for that.
Well, it doesn't come from taking the centre ground. It comes from doing what Donald Trump did, which is saying it exactly as it is, having a broad tent and taking people from your movement into that tent. Nigel has done neither of those. He's pivoting to the centre ground, and he's getting rid of people who've actually got the fearless, brave thinking required to save this country.
I've got another one I've got to take in and give them a good old bang to their head when I have my meeting with them all. Ben Habib, it's great to talk to you. We didn't even get... I know you're sensible on the asylum seekers. Finding out who they are seems like a good idea. Former MEP, former Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Again, I've got a lot of time for all these people. I think they're incredibly brave people. They're speaking sense. But I think the purist thing ain't gonna fly with the voters.
No, it really isn't. And do you know what the other problem is that there are an awful lot of egos for very different reasons. No women to bring that testosterone level down a bit and put some common sense there. That's your job.
Deep sighs, everybody. Claire, it's been fabulous having your company. Thank you very much. And we've got to say goodbye to you now, because we're going to slip Peter Cardwell into the studio. He's going to be telling us what on earth's been going on at PMQs. But it wasn't as good as what we've just been doing here on air. He's coming up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
say woman whilst you're having your life saved.
Right.
It has to be a person with breasts. Can you imagine about to take your last gasp and say, don't call me a woman?
Right. I know.
I mean, what is it, man?
It's ridiculous because again they're using words which don't make any sense. You know, call somebody a woman, you know what you're talking about, right? Yeah. But if you call somebody a person with breasts, it's already longer. It's already not accurate because a woman might not necessarily have breasts. What about a woman who's had a mastectomy? What about a woman who perhaps is less well endowed than another woman? You know, it's not accurate.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:51 is the time. Time to also hear from Peter Carbell, Talk presenter, of course, political commentator, to find out what's been going on in PMQs. Usual rules, you watch it so we don't have to, and you tell us if there are any highlights. First of all, yes, were there?
Yes.
Yep, that case, let's do an item on it. Otherwise, get back out of the studio, you're surplus requirement. So a lively one, what's been happening?
Yeah, I think Kemi Badenoch perhaps got her mojo back a little bit today, actually. It's less than 2 months now until the council elections, but council tax, what councils do, that was a big part of what happened, along with the cost of living. But specifically on councils, she certainly used a phrase that got Parliament appreciating what she was saying.
OK, well, let's have a watch and a listen of what she had to say.
Mr. Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Yeah, I think you're more impressed with that gag than the trash. And we don't say trash, we say rubbish.
You say rubbish, yeah.
Talking trash. Again, a bit on parliamentary language. That said, you know me, I could do a whole 3 hours every day on the bins.
No, well, indeed, yes.
How on earth people in Birmingham are coping with the bins not being collected for weeks on end, I do not know.
And you pay your council tax, it's the first thing.
It's literally the only thing you want.
Come on, empty the bins, guys. Certainly, and the cost of living. It was interesting, actually, the language, speaking of parliamentary language, Kemi Badenoch talking about an emergency budget coming up in 2 weeks. Yeah. It's not. It's a spring statement. It's been in the...
Although it's going to actually massively roll back, we think, on some of the things
yes,
we expect.
And she pointed that out as well.
Oh, OK. Right, well, let's have a watch and listen to that.
In 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events, but the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners, then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr. Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole, a mini budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
that's kind of Keir Starmer at his worst, isn't it? Also, by the way, the 11% inflation rate, that was a result of what happened with the Ukrainian energy. That would have happened whoever was in charge
Yes, I think you're right.
Because of the war and insane policies on climate change policies on our security. It is interesting because a lot of the impact of that budget, the disastrous Rachel Reeves' first budget, that hasn't been felt just yet because that national insurance rise in employers, the jobs tax, that hasn't been felt. We've got the council tax going up.
New financial year, it's all going to kick in.
Early April is when actually suddenly people go, whoa, hold on a minute.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that will kick in just less than a month's time at the start of the new financial year. And you always ask me, Julia, what are the highlights of PMQs? Yeah. It's not just about Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. In fact, there's a backbencher I expect most people won't have heard of called Andrew Snowden, who asked, he's from Filed, and he asked a really, really good question today on two-tier care, on this justice idea that your ethnicity can determine your sentence.
That is just such a hot topic in the last week, hasn't it? Let's have a watch and listen to that.
In just 20 days' time, new sentencing guidance will come into effect that the Justice Secretary has already conceded will be two-tier in its nature. It will mean that the colour of your skin or the religion you have can give you leniency in the eyes of the law and will plunge public confidence in the judiciary into crisis. But it is avoidable. We Conservatives have tabled a bill that, if backed on Friday, can stop this guidance in its tracks. So will the Prime Minister, will he now overrule his Justice Secretary and confirm here and now that he will back this bill, or will he simply step aside and prove he has in fact been two-tier Keir all along?
Well, everyone should be equal before the law. That is why the Lord Chancellor has taken up the issue with the Sentencing Council. But he needs to do his homework, because the proposal that he complains about was drafted in 2024. And the last government was consulted. And when they were consulted, what did they say? They said they welcomed the proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Shadow Justice Secretary is taking the Sentencing Council to court. Perhaps he should add himself as the second defendant so we can get to the bottom of the
Look, that has been a massive issue the last week, hasn't it, Peter Cobble?
Certainly.
But the key thing is that, again, it was something proposed under the Tories, and this is a whole uni-party thing, this idea that actually no one really noticed, no one really cared, and we've got the Sentencing Council that makes these decisions. Why? I don't know, unaccountable, unelectable body. Surely it should be our elected representatives making those decisions.
Set up by set up by Gordon Brown in 2009. The Sentencing Council, headed by Baroness Sue Carr, has made a number of questionable decisions, I would argue, especially saying that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch shouldn't criticise a ruling of a judge at one stage. Hello, free speech?
Absolutely. It is absolutely extraordinary. And obviously, interesting news that's appeared in the last hour or so. Tudor Sadiq, Labour MP, was anti-corruption minister in the Treasury. It turns out, as a result of what's happening in Bangladesh with her aunt, she's having some bank accounts and properties seized.
And a travel ban as well. She actually asked a question today at PMQs of no real consequence. She was named last night as one of the most influential women in Westminster. Interesting. Maybe one of the most influential women in Bangladesh for perhaps the wrong reasons.
Perhaps not able to buy a drink anymore, though, because bank accounts frozen by all accounts, as reports are claiming, over concerns about her being involved in their anti-corruption allegations.
She denies, of course.
Of course she does. Absolutely she does. Very, very close to her aunt, though. Quite bizarre.
Yes.
But there we are. Peter Cobble, thank you very much indeed, roaring through that. Ian Collins is here.